Chapter 2069 Revelation Seal his cultivation. Seeing that they had managed to catch Zhongxian with the massive net, the semidivinities unwittingly heaved a sigh of relief. They didn't expect things to go so smoothly. One of the semidivinity realm warriors stepped forward and tapped his finger on Zhongxian, intending to seal off Zhongxian's cultivation. "I've been waiting for you," Zhongxian murmured with a faint smile. 3 swords suddenly appeared out of nowhere, and with a set of profound movements, they pierced right through the warrior's back. Then, with a vertical motion, the warrior was sliced into 2. As soon as the warrior was killed, Zhongxian could feel the massive net loosened a little. It was as if a formation had lost one of its core sources of energy, resulting in some degree of instability. Alarmed, the remaining 9 semidivinity realm cultivators swiftly infused their energy into the massive net, hoping to stabilize it. But as fast as their reaction was, none of them could have been able to move faster than Zhongxian, who was waiting to seize this opportunity. He immediately dashed out of the massive net, leaped into the air, and brandished his sword furiously, raining a powerful current of sword chi down on one of the semidivinity realm warriors. Even though all 10 of those warriors were at semidivinity realm, they weren't of equal strength to one another. Zhongxian was able to tell that this person was the weakest one of the remaining 9. By using his own body as bait, he was able to swiftly get rid of one of his enemies. After that, he made use of the lapse from the crowd's shock to assault the weakest one. Despite his swift movements, his head was constantly calculating what was the best move he could take in order to maximize his chances of eliminating his enemies. If he wasn't confident of his abilities, why would he take the risk to come here? Puha! The might of 4 swords augmented with the god's sword intent formed a force far beyond what the weakest semi-divinity realm warrior could deal with. In an instant, he was sliced into multiple pieces. None of the warriors could have expected 2 of their comrades to be killed so quickly. Everything happened so quickly that a hint of fear was arising from the depths of their hearts. This fear wasn't just directed toward Zhongxian but toward their leader too. It was a huge failure of their part to display such unbecoming results before their leader. Boom, boom, boom. 8 hands fell onto the floor simultaneously, and a powerful outburst of energy froze the space in the Hall of Gods. Every single movement came with humongous resistance. With a roar, Zhongxian tried to bring out the blackback tortoise and the 3 sharks to assist him, but just like the Azure Bridge, he was unable to open his tamed beast sack in here as well. With veins popping from his temples, he forcefully brandished the Tongshang sword. At the same time, he brought out the metal chain and the halberd as well to disrupt the formation created by the remaining 8 semidivinities. With the 3 semidivinity artifacts moving together, as if a boulder had been thrown into a pond, a black rift swiftly rippled through the surroundings, blasting open the frozen space. It's the end. Zhongxian had put all of his efforts into blasting the frozen space open, only to realize that one of the enemies had managed to sneak up on him. The other party raised his palm to strike down on him. Peng! There was no time for Zhongxian to dodge at all. So, he could only channel his energy to the front of his body in hopes of diverting the attack. However, the palm strike was simply too powerful. That single strike fractured 3 of his ribcage bones, and he fell from the sky. If it was 3, 4, or even 5 semidivinities, he would still have been able to handle the situation. However, to face 10 of them simultaneously, not to mention that all of them were experts from the Hall of Gods at that, it was inevitable that it would still be difficult for him to stand his ground despite his superior skills. Crashing heavily onto the floor, blood seeped out from the corners of Zhongxian's lips. He tried to quickly return to his feet, but a metal chain swiftly wrapped around him, binding him tightly. A semidivinity artifact. Zhongxian could feel the metal chain digging tightly into his skin. Even with his current strength, he was actually unable to free himself at all. An encirclement of 10 semidivinities, but you were still able to kill 2 of them. That explains why you were able to survive even though I have sent so many people for you in the past. I would have expected nothing less from a person chosen by the heavens. The silhouette above the flames glanced down at Zhongxian coldly as he spoke. He didn't seem to be frustrated or angered because Zhongxian had killed 2 of his subordinates. A person chosen by the heavens? Knowing that it was impossible for him to get away, Zhongxian gave up on struggling altogether. Instead, He focused on driving his junchi to heal his injuries as he asked with a tight knit on his forehead. Indeed. You are someone who harnesses the heavens within you, isn't that so? The silhouette remarked impassively. Those words caused Zhongxian's body to stiffen. He had never expected anyone to ask such a question. The fact that he had the Library of Heaven's Path in him should have been something that only Luo Ruoxin knew of. No one else should have been aware of it. Yet, the words of the silhouette seemed to be hinting at the same thing as well. Did the chief of the Hall of Gods know something about the Library of Heaven's Path? Or could it be that the gods had the ability to see through the Library of Heaven's Path? As the Hall of Gods had attacked him after he comprehended the god's sword intent, he had thought that it was simply afraid that he would attempt to steal a god, one character from it after he had grown up. However, it was apparent that he couldn't be more wrong than that. So what if he had comprehended the god's sword intent? A person who had comprehended the god's sword intent still wouldn't stand a chance against 10 semi-divinities. Not to mention, the Hall of Gods should have plenty of the unique aura required for one to achieve a breakthrough to semi-divinity realm. Even if he were to snatch the god character from them, it shouldn't warrant them to make a move. Everything would make sense if its goal had been Library of Heaven's Path right from the start. That would also explain why the warriors who had been sent to apprehend him had been strictly ordered to capture him alive. Zhongxian tried to conceal his expression, but the silhouette still caught a hint of astonishment in the depths of his eyes. With a light chuckle, the silhouette said, "You seem to be a little bewildered. Are you wondering how I knew that you harness the heavens inside of you?" Instead of responding, Zhongxian simply glared at the silhouette coldly. Paying no heed to Zhongxian's silence, the silhouette continued speaking. Only a person chosen by the heavens would have the ability to rise to the Forsaken Continent and advance from ancient sage to heavenly high immortal realm within less than a month. Not to mention, you are able to stand on equal grounds with ordinary semi-divinity realm cultivators as well. It's through your superior talent that you were able to convince 4 of the 6 sects to toss aside their prejudice and unite together under your leadership. Isn't that so? With narrowed eyes, Zhongxian asked, "What are you planning? You are holding on to something you are unqualified for. If you continue keeping it on you, it'll eventually lead to a disaster. It would be better if you pass it on to someone else before tragedy strikes," the silhouette said with a wave of his hand. Hula. The semi-divinities in the surroundings raised his hands simultaneously, channeling their energy toward Zhongxian and wrapping him amidst it. Zhongxian's body began rising to the air uncontrollably before flying to the side. His body eventually landed not too far away on a stone step. Looking upward, he saw an average-sized circular platform. Upon seeing the circular platform, Zhongxian's face darkened. The altar of the Starchaser Palace? "So, you really are the one who captured Palace Chief Du?" He had seen a replica of the altar in Jiang Yao's hands before, allowing him to recognize the altar in an instant. "Begin the ritual." The silhouette couldn't be bothered to respond to Zhongxian's question, so he raised his hand and hollered. Innumerable treasures swiftly descended atop the altar. Following that, a lady walked into the room and began chanting in a mysterious language. Zhongxian turned his gaze over and saw that the lady was no other than the deity whom Sovereign Chen Yong had summoned back then, the ex-head of the Starchaser Palace, Du Qingyuan. It would appear that Du Qingyuan had lost her will. Even though she was moving and speaking, her eyes were tightly shut and her voice was completely devoid of emotions. It felt like there was someone controlling her body instead. Xiong xiong. Along with her chanting, the blue flame on the altar continued to burn furiously. Above the Hall of Gods, a massive black hole began to form, as if a connection link was being formed with a higher dimension. "Rise!" Du Qingyuan exclaimed. Zhongxian's body immediately rose up before landing lightly on top of the altar. The flames of the altar converged and dived right into Zhongxian's body. He thought that he would be burned, but to his surprise, the flames didn't feel hot at all. On the contrary, it felt warm and soothing. "What are they trying to do?" Zhongxian frowned. Having read all of the books in the Starchaser Palace, he had gained a deep understanding of the various rituals conducted by the otherworldly demonic tribe. However, he had never come into contact with such a ritual before. Normal rituals would require one to offer treasures to a god in order to obtain greater power or information. However, This ritual clearly deviated from the norm. If anything, it felt like he was being used as the tribute in order to achieve an insidious goal. TZZZZZZZ. As the flame continued burning, the illusory silhouette seated on the throne, the chief of the Hall of Gods, slowly became more and more corporeal. Are they trying to absorb my power? Zhong Xian's eyes narrowed in astonishment. He finally understood the intention behind the ritual. This was not a ritual to summon a god to gather more power. Instead, the other party was trying to take his power and implant it into himself, thus replacing him. Is he trying to take the library of heaven's path away from me? Zhong Xian thought in alarm. It was no wonder why the other party needed the altar of the Starchaser Palace, not hesitating to snatch it over. It seemed like he was intending to use the mysterious altar to conduct a ritual so as to replace him as the owner of the library of heaven's path. Even though he didn't know how the altar really worked, he could feel energy slowly seeping away from his body. It felt like there was a chance that the other party would really be able to take the library of heaven's path away from him. Wang. Slowly, Zhong Xian's body grew fainter and fainter as a result of the flame burning inside of him. At this rate, the ritual might really claim his life. At this crucial moment, the pendant around his neck suddenly released a brilliant light. Pu. The silhouette on the throne suddenly staggered a little. At the same time, the flame on the altar began to flicker weakly, almost as if it would disappear in the next instant. What's going on here? The silhouette quickly looked at Zhong Xian intently before flitting over with light footsteps. He forcefully grabbed the pendant around Zhong Xian's neck and held it up. TZZZZZ. Ah. However, as soon as the silhouette came into contact with the pendant, black smoke immediately began rising from his body. T. The silhouette cursed beneath his breath as he hurriedly released his grip on the pendant. He tried to grab the pendant again several times, but the searing heat emanating from it made him dare not approach at all. I'm not going to be foiled by a darned pendant at this crucial moment. Let's see how it can protect you after I take your life. The silhouette roared. The flames on the altar were already on the verge of being extinguished. At this rate, the ritual would really be foiled. The silhouette knew he had to do something in order to salvage the situation. Who? The 8 semi-divinities immediately received the order and made a move simultaneously. Channeling their might together, they executed a powerful surge of sword chi aimed right at Zhong Xian's throat. If the strike were to really land, Zhong Xian would be a goner without any doubt. Boom. At this crucial moment, the door of the Hall of Gods was blasted open by an overwhelming force. A figure rushed right into the Hall of Gods and tapped his finger ahead of him. Peng. The sword chi created by the 8 semi-divinities dissipated in an instant. The faces of all 8 of them paled as fresh blood spurted from their mouths. You. Upon seeing the newly arrived figure, the silhouette widened his eyes in anger and struck downward to fend against the figure's assault. Peng. As the two forces collided with one another, the two of them were forced to retreat a step each. The newly arrived figure turned his sight to Zhong Xian, and with a grasp of his hand, he wrapped the young man around with his energy and pulled the young man over to him. Let's go. The figure quickly sent Zhong Xian out of the Hall of Gods, and before leaving himself, he turned around and exerted a powerful palm thrust which devastated the interiors of the Hall of Gods. Then, with a light footstep, he swiftly flitted away together with Zhong Xian. In just a few instants, the two of them had already vanished on the Azure Bridge. Chase them. An aggrieved voice echoed from the Hall of Gods in their wake. Chapter 2070 The meeting of Kong Shi and Zhong Xian. A gale echoed in Zhong Xian's ears as he watched his surroundings swiftly disappearing behind him. What incredible speed! Zhong Xian narrowed his eyes in astonishment. The person who had saved him was actually able to travel at several times his speed despite bringing him along. Even the strongest semi-divinity realm cultivator shouldn't have been able to move this quickly. Is he a god? The semi-divinity realm warrior of the Hall of Gods whom he had forced to explode back in the ocean of exiled stars could probably be considered the strongest of all, but even he was nothing compared to the person who had just saved him. While Zhong Xian's mind was still wandering around the place, the other party said, I haven't reached the level of a god yet. The reason I'm able to move so quickly is due to the evanescent boots. Evanescent boots. Zhongxian lowered his head to take a look, and he noticed that the other party was equipped with a pair of striking golden boots. These boots were emanating a unique power that allowed him to cover dozens of li with every step, making it seem almost as if he was teleporting from one spot to another. That should be the guardian artifact of the evanescent immortal sect. Could you possibly be? Zhongxian's body stiffened up as a person surfaced in his mind. We'll talk about it later. The Azure Bridge has already begun retracting. If we don't hurry up, we could lose our lives here, the other party said with a light chuckle as he continued flitting forward with a slightly grim look in his eyes. The Azure Bridge has already begun retracting? Zhongxian was appalled. He lowered his head and noticed that the Azure Bridge was indeed slowly retracting to the Hall of Gods. With a confused look, he asked, I thought that the Azure Bridge lasts for an entire day, so why would it suddenly retract before the time is up? All in all, Zhongxian had only spent 14 hours getting to the Hall of Gods, and he had spent less than an hour inside. Why would the Azure Bridge suddenly begin retracting at that moment? Could it be that the descent and retraction of the Azure Bridge could be arbitrarily decided by the chief of the Hall of Gods? A day has already passed, the other party replied bitterly. There's a difference in the flow of time between the Hall of Gods and the Forsaken Continent by 110. You didn't notice it? Difference in the flow of time? Zhongxian was shocked. He had come under the attack of 10 semidivinities as soon as he entered the Hall of Gods, such that there was no time for him to think too deeply into the matter. After that, he had been taken to the altar, and a ritual had been conducted on him. As he thought back, there was indeed some difference in the flow of time in the Hall of Gods and the Forsaken Continent. A ratio of 1:10. It said that the flow of time of the firmament is 1/10 of that of the Forsaken Continent. The same goes for the Hall of Gods, the other party replied. I see. Zhongxian nodded slowly. By a 1:10 ratio, the 1 hour he had spent in there would equate to roughly 10 hours. Going by this calculation, it had indeed been a day since the Azure Bridge descended, so it was only expected for it to retract. Seeing that Zhongxian understood, the other party smiled lightly before stepped on the ground forcefully. All right, enough talking for the time being. Use your zhenqi to protect your body. I'll be conducting spatial traverse. In an instant, his speed reached a new peak, causing the space around him to become warped. Sila. Even space was torn down as a result of the movement. Naturally, Zhongxian was under a huge amount of pressure as well. It felt like everything was collapsing in on him, squeezing him tight and leaving him breathless. Catcher. If not for the zhenqi barrier that Zhongxian had reinforced around him, his body might have been squashed to a pile of minced meat. Who? All of a sudden, the pressure vanished. Panting deeply, Zhongxian took a closer look around him and found that he was no longer on the Azure Bridge. Instead, what appeared before him was a massive palace floating amid the clouds. Zhongxian straightened his body as he asked, Where are we? He could tell that even though he was still in the Azure, he was not on the Forsaken Continent anymore. It felt like he had leaped from the Forsaken Continent into a folded space. This is the headquarters of the Ethereal Hall, the other party replied with a smile as he turned around to face Zhongxian. Only then did Zhongxian get a good glimpse of the other party's appearance. The other party looked the exact same as the person who was worshipped in all of the master-teacher pavilions. He had a tall physique with a flowing beard. Between his brows, one could see a hint of benevolence and compassion for the world. Junior Zhongxian pays respects to Kongsha. Zhongxian bowed deeply. He had already guessed who the other party was, but only after seeing the other party's appearance and disposition in person was he finally able to confirm the matter. The person standing before him was none other than the world's teacher who had created the Master-Teacher Pavilion and united mankind against the otherworldly demonic tribe, Kongsha. He had encountered the other party's soul fragments several times, but this was his first time meeting the man in person. The other party was more amiable than he had expected. His presence felt like a warm breeze during the onset of spring. Rise, Kongsha said with a smile as he reached out to help Zhongxian up. Is the Master-Teacher Pavilion still doing fine? Yes, the Master-Teacher Pavilion is still following your teachings. They have worked hard to protect mankind over the years, Zhongxian said before recounting the happenings of the Master-Teacher Pavilion after Kongsha's departure. I see. Kongsha stroked his beard slowly. Mankind will have to remain united in order to survive against the other races and leave its mark on the world. The reason I created the Master-Teacher Pavilion was for all men to become powerful, and it seems like my efforts weren't in vain. It was difficult for all men to be powerful, but through the selfless impartation of knowledge of the Master-Teacher Pavilion, mankind would continue to build on the knowledge of their predecessors and advance to greater heights. Indeed, the enmity between the otherworldly demonic tribe and mankind is also slowly being repaired. Even though it's impossible to sever the chains of hatred right away, I believe that, with time, all scars will eventually fade, Zhongxian said as he explained the current situation with the otherworldly demonic tribe as well. Kongsha smiled a little as he looked at Zhongxian and asked, "You have been to Starchaser Island, right? Did you notice that the indigenous population living there are very similar to the otherworldly demonic tribe?" "Yes, I did notice it." Zhongxian nodded in response. "Do you know the story behind it?" Kongsha nodded. In truth, the otherworldly demonic tribe and the indigenous population of Starchaser Island come from the same origin. They are gods who have been exiled. Gods who have been exiled? Zhongxian frowned. Hold on a moment. I heard from Elder Han Zhenqiu that those living on Starchaser Island are the indigenous population of the Forsaken Continent. Is that not true? Aside from Starchaser Palace, the cultivators of the 6 sects proclaimed themselves as gods who had been exiled, whereas those living on Starchaser Island were the indigenous population. Why was Kongsha saying the opposite? Hearing Zhongxian's response, Kongsha smiled a little and said, "The other 5 sects are just trying to give themselves a better name. If they are truly the exiled gods, isn't it odd that only Starchaser Palace has an altar to hold rituals to connect with the firmament?" That question stumped Zhongxian. He had never thought about it like that. Kongsha's argument was perfectly logical. Kongsha shook his head before continuing. A better background and reputation go a long way to developing a power. As time passes, what is false eventually becomes viewed as the truth and vice versa. Who can differentiate between statements that can hardly be verified anymore? Zhongxian fell silent. It was similar to how kings would proclaim themselves as beings chosen by the gods and embed all kinds of legends to their rule, making it seem as if they were the true son of heaven. Legitimacy could be a powerful tool indeed if people believed in it. It seemed like the same had happened to the Forsaken Continent as well. Those of the other 5 sects proclaimed themselves as the exiled gods, and as time passed, people began to believe these falsehoods. In the end, they even labeled the true exiled gods as the indigenous population. But if they are gods, why would they carry such overwhelming killing intent within them? Zhongxian asked doubtfully. In truth, it did not matter to him who the true exiled gods were. After all, he was not taking any sides, and he viewed himself as a mere passerby in the azure. It probably has something to do with the firmament. That's beyond the scope of my knowledge. Kongsha shook his head. I see. Zhongxian nodded slowly before raising his head to look at Kongsha once more. I still have some questions that I hope you can clarify for me. Speak your mind. Kongsha, you have been in the azure for several thousand years now. Are you unable to break free of the dimension barrier and ascend to the firmament? This was what had confounded Zhongxian deeply. There was no doubt about Kongsha's talents and capabilities. Even he, in less than a month since his arrival, was able to reach a level where he was just a single step away from reaching the semi-divinity realm. Given so, how could the world's teacher possibly remain bound there for several thousand years? Reaching the firmament isn't as easy as you think. Furthermore, when I entered the Hall of Gods alone and clashed with the gods back then, while I did manage to acquire a god character, I ended up sustaining significant injuries as well. I had to go into a coma in order to recover, and it was only recently that I managed to regain my consciousness. Kongsha halted his words there with a conflicted look on his face. It seemed like he was unwilling to speak about the past anymore. If it's not convenient for you to speak, I won't inquire any more about that, Zhongxian said. However, there is one matter that I would like to seek clarification from you about. You gave me a token that allowed me to purchase any cultivation resources from the ethereal hall for free a while ago. However, why is it that I encountered an attack from the Hall of Gods each time I used it? This was the matter that made Zhongxian deeply doubtful about Kongsha. If he could not clarify this issue, he would never be able to fully trust Kongsha. Regarding that, I'll have to apologize to you. It's an unforgivable oversight on my part, Kongsha said apologetically. In the years that I was in a coma, the influence of the Hall of Gods managed to seep into the ethereal hall, and many of my subordinates have secretly pledged loyalty to the Hall of Gods. The one whom I entrusted to forge the token was a deeply trusted confidant of mine, but it turns out that he was in collusion with the Hall of Gods all this time. I sentenced that confidant to death after learning of this matter. Over the past few days, I was busy trying to track down and apprehend the spies of the Hall of Gods, which was also why I was unable to meet you at the heaven-anchoring boulder prior to the descent of the Azure Bridge. Otherwise, you wouldn't have fallen into the trap of the Hall of Gods. Zhongxian contemplated for a moment before nodding slightly. He could not find any logical loopholes in Kongsha's story, and the latter appeared deeply earnest. Since you are currently the head of 4 sects, you should have heard about how I have borrowed the guardian artifacts of the Evanescent Immortal sect and Black Mirror Citadel, right? Kongsha asked. Zhongxian nodded in response. I have my own plans for borrowing those artifacts. I'm hoping to use them to free the Forsaken Continent from the rule of the Hall of Gods. I heard that you have clashed with the Hall of Gods on several occasions, so I believe you are aware of their strength. I knew that I would need more trump cards up my sleeves. While the guardian artifacts of the 6 sects haven't reached the semi-divinity realm yet, they harness the thoughts and wills of countless experts from the past several thousand years, granting them astounding prowess, Kongsha explained. If that was really true, it would have been a huge misunderstanding from his part. Now that I have clarified all of the questions you have, there are some important things that I have to tell you. Kongsha looked at Zhongxian grimly as he spoke. With a wave of his hand, he swiftly activated an isolation formation to sever the space around them from the real world before he spoke further. Do you know that you are already nearing the end of your life? Chapter 2071 The First Order, Nearing the End of My Life? Zhongxian was completely mystified by Kongsha's abrupt words. The only threat he was facing at the moment was the Hall of Gods. Why was he nearing the end of his life then? Indeed, Kongsha said. He placed his hands behind his back as a glint flashed in his eyes. If I'm not mistaken, you have a fragment of the heavens in you, right? You. Zhongxian was shocked by what he had just heard. The Library of Heaven's Path had been his greatest secret all this while, but it felt like it was getting exposed far too easily in recent days. First the chief of the Hall of Gods, and now, it was shown that Kongsha knew about it as well. He felt as if his secrets were being laid bare to the world, and this left him feeling deeply uncomfortable. A slight frown made its way onto his forehead. You are wondering how I knew of the matter, right? A little amused by Zhongxian's bewildered face, Kongsha chuckled a little before he spoke. There's no need to be too nervous. The truth is that I'm just like you. I have a fragment of the heavens within me as well. You also have the library as well? Zhongxian's eyes nearly bulged from his eyes. When he heard about Kongsha's experiences on the Master-Teacher continent, he had wondered if Kongsha had the Library of Heaven's Path as well. That would have explained why the latter was able to come up with perfect cultivation techniques and advance his cultivation so swiftly. However, thinking that the chances were incredibly slim, he eventually dropped the idea. Library? Kongsha was slightly taken aback by Zhongxian's question. No, that's not it. What I have acquired is the space-time jurisdiction of the heavens, otherwise known as the Heaven's Order. Heaven's Order. Just like how the noon sun falls and the full moon wanes, all beings in the world have to obey a certain order. When it comes to order, the very foundation of it lies in that of space and time, Kongsha said. Space and time were the very fundamental elements required to create order in this intrinsically chaotic world. They served as the very basis of the development of natural cycles, and they were required for life to blossom. Without them, the world would have been nothing but chaos. As such, space and time were viewed as the most primordial law of the entire world, otherwise known as the First Order. That would explain why Kongsha was able to come up with the great codex of spring and autumn, which harnessed both the powers of time and space. Even when placed in the library of Heaven's Path, it was still able to form its own individual chamber. It was likely that the Heaven's Order was an ability that wouldn't pale in comparison to the library of Heaven's Path. Previously, when he saw Kong Xiao's word of law bloodline ability in person, he was filled with curiosity as to just what the ability Kongsha had comprehended was. After hearing this, everyone immediately clicked together perfectly like puzzle pieces. It was out of Kongsha's desire to bring order to the world that he created the Master-Teacher Pavilion and organized the unique occupations and their heritage. Due to that, mankind enjoyed persistent growth over the past tens of thousands of years, granting them the power to stand against even the innately powerful otherworldly demonic tribe. Without order, it's impossible to build anything significant, Kongsha nodded in response. Following that, he looked at Zhongxian with confusion in his eyes as he asked, "Could it be that the fragment of the heavens you have acquired has nothing to do with order? You mentioned a library earlier, right?" Despite knowing that Zhongxian had a fragment of the heavens, he had no way of knowing what was the ability that the young man wielded. The heavens were vast and all-encompassing, such that it was nigh impossible to comprehend their entirety. Yes, that's indeed what I mentioned earlier. While I said that it was a library, if I'm not mistaken, I think it should be Heaven's Imperfections. Zhongxian pondered for a moment before replying. Those were the words that surfaced in his mind when he first awakened the Library of Heaven's Path. It was due to this ability that the Library of Heaven's Path was able to see through the flaws of all beings and uncover the most correct path forward. He had come a long way together with it. Heaven's order and Heaven's imperfections. Kongsha muttered contemplatively before his eyes lit up. I see. Kongsha, you mentioned earlier that I'm coming to the end of my life. Does that have something to do with my Heaven's imperfections? Zhongxian asked. Indeed, Kongsha nodded. Receiving a fragment of the heavens is a huge fortuitous encounter. It's something that all cultivators would dream of. However, this power comes at a huge cost. As you use it more and more often, you will slowly be assimilated by the heavens, thus eventually losing your own will. Zhongxian was stunned. He had never heard of such a thing before. However, one thing he did notice was that the Library of Heaven's Path was getting stronger and stronger with time. On top of that, he had also become extremely reliant on it, such that it was difficult for him to proceed on if he didn't have any Heaven's Path divine art with him. Could this be an effect of the assimilation of the heavens? The power of heavens always exists as a double-edged blade. When there's gain, there's bound to be loss as well. You are able to cultivate swiftly with the fragment of the heavens, but that doesn't come without a cost. If I'm not mistaken, the technique you cultivate should be a cultivation technique of the heavens, right? Kongsha asked with a stern look in his eyes. You have come a long way with it, but have you realized that there's a pitch-black gaseous substance that is lurking in the depths of your body? No matter how you try to purge it, be it through heavenly flames or lightning, it simply wouldn't budge at all. Those words made Zhongxian stunned for a moment before he nodded. I did notice something like that. Are you referring to the thing hidden in the innate fetal poison? One of your soul fragments mentioned it to me back at the Master-Teacher continent. Zhongxian was initially a little worried about the matter, but as nothing happened all this while, he decided to pay no heed to it, and eventually, he forgot about it even. It was only when Kongsha mentioned it once more did it finally strike him once more. Thinking back, Kongsha's soul fragment did warn him about the matter, just that there was no time to go into details back then. With a grim look on his face, Kongsha said, Indeed. Take a closer look at it right now. Do you notice anything different about it from the last time you paid notice to it? Different. Zhongxian immediately channeled his consciousness into his body to take a closer look. A moment later, his body stiffened. It seems like it has gotten much bigger than before. Furthermore, it's no longer pitch black anymore. Rather, it appears to be a little grayish instead. Previously, the gaseous remains were only about a finger's length. As it was simply too small, Zhongxian wasn't able to catch a clear glimpse at it, so it looked black to him then. However, with it growing twofold the size of before, it somewhat resembled a tiny snake coiling within his body. That's exactly it, Kongsha nodded. Did you notice any anomalies regarding it previously? Zhongxian pondered for a moment before shaking his head. That thing had been in his body for a very long time now, but he had never been able to make sense as to what it really was. Naturally, he didn't notice anything anomalous regarding it. It didn't hinder his cultivation nor his flow of zhenqi at all, so he didn't think that it was harmful to his body. Try to use the ability of your heaven's imperfections. Make sure to focus your attention on the grayish gaseous substance, Kongsha said. I'll give it a try, Zhongxian thought as he turned to the formation which Kongsha had just set up and willed floors. Who? The library of Heaven's Path jolted, and a book filled with the details of the formation was materialized. Zhongxian casually scanned through the details, and he had to admit that he was really deeply impressed. Kongsha's comprehension of formations had reached an incredible level, such that he was able to set up an impeccable formation so casually. This was something that even the current him was unable to pull off. How is it? Do you notice any difference? Kongsha asked. Zhongxian had been paying attention to the gaseous substance all along, and he couldn't help but frown. There doesn't seem to be any changes at all. No, that's not right. It seems to have grown by a little. It's stronger than before. The increment was extremely slight, such that it was imperceptible through one's eyes. Nevertheless, Zhongxian was still able to notice a very small difference after he used the Library of Heaven's Path. Indeed, it should have grown by a little, Kongsha nodded in response. Every single time you use the Heaven's imperfections, the gaseous substance would bulk up by a bit. Zhongxian was slightly taken aback by this bizarre situation, but why didn't I sense anything before then? Those at his cultivation realm were extremely sensitive to the changes in their bodies. Under normal circumstances, no matter how slight the increment was, he should have still been able to notice it. Kongsha answered the question. The battle techniques and artifacts on the Master-Teacher continent are relatively weaker, such that even if you use the Heaven's imperfections on them, the growth of the gaseous substance would be insignificant. However, it's different now that you are on the Azure. As your ability grows, the side effects will become more and more severe. The side effects have been insignificant so far, but they will start showing as you proceed onto semi-divinity realm and beyond. To use an analogy, it would be similar to the difference of pulling an empty cart and pulling a cart filled with all sorts of objects. It went without saying that one would wear out faster pulling a heavier cart. The items on the Azure were of a much higher tier than that of the Master-Teacher continent, so it was more demanding on his Library of Heaven's Path too. As a result, the grayish gaseous substance was produced in greater amounts as well. Is the grayish gaseous substance fatal? Zhongxian shuddered a little as he asked. It would be a blessing if it's only fatal, Kongsha said with a bitter smile. What's even more frightening is that the grayish gaseous substance will only continue building up within you, and there's nothing that can be done to erase it. As time goes by, it will assimilate you into a part of the heavens, making you lose your sense of self. Zhongxian's body stiffened up. His gut feeling told him that what Kongsha had told him was very likely to be real. He had tried many means to remove the gaseous substance in the past, but to no avail. Given so, it would only continue to build on in his body, causing him to fuse together as one with the Library of Heaven's Path. Eventually, he might become a being devoid of feelings and consciousness. If so, how would he be different from being dead? Could it be that you are also? A thought flashed across Zhongxian's mind, and he quickly turned his gaze back to Kongsha once more. The person standing before him also possessed a fragment of the heavens as well, wielding the ability of Heaven's Order. Furthermore, based on what he had heard from the other party back on the Master-Teacher continent, it would appear that the other party was bothered by grayish gaseous substance as well. Indeed, I was in the same plight as you as well. I didn't have the ability to get rid of the grayish gaseous substance, and I nearly lost my sense of self as a result. It's fortunate that I noticed it before it was too late and successfully resolved the problem, Kongsha replied. You managed to resolve the issue? Zhongxian widened his eyes in astonishment. He quickly clasped his fist and said, I beseech you to impart to me the method of overcoming this problem. I'll be deeply grateful to you for it. He deeply appreciated the ability of the Library of Heaven's Path. It had saved him on many occasions, and it had allowed him to grow at an exponential rate as well. However, it would be all meaningless if he were to lose his life as a result of that. No matter what, he had to cure himself of the gaseous substance. It seemed like it would be best for him to avoid using the Library of Heaven's path in the short run. The solution is surprisingly simple. Kongsha looked at Zhongxian with a deep gaze as he spoke. It's just a question of whether you are willing to make a sacrifice or not. What kind of sacrifice would I have to make? Zhongxian asked. The reason behind the accumulation of the gaseous substance in your body is because it's against the laws of nature for a human to wield the might of the heavens, Kongsha explained. As long as you are willing to sever your connection with the Library of Heaven's path, you'll no longer face the threat of being assimilated by the heavens. Chapter 2072 The Other Kongsha, Sever My Connection with the Library of Heaven's Path? Indeed. The heavens are not an existence that humans are able to control with their strength. If you continue keeping it within your body, it's only a matter of time before you become a puppet of the heavens, Kongsha said. You said that the ability you have acquired is heaven's imperfections, but why are the cultivation techniques you practice flawless then? Isn't that a loophole in itself? Those words struck a deep chord with Zhongxian. This paradox had indeed been weighing on his mind for quite a while now. If even the heavens were flawed, how could the heavens path divine art be truly flawless? No, that's not it. It appears flawless to me now, but it doesn't mean that it would remain so in the other worlds. Zhongxian thought. His cultivation had gone berserk once due to this matter, and it was Luo Ruoxin's pendant who had saved his life then. Perfection was a concept that could only be applied in a limited context. Across different worlds, there would be different laws of nature. Naturally, flaws that didn't exist before might have started appearing. As such, the Heaven's Path divine art couldn't be said to be a completely perfect cultivation technique. At the very most, it could only be said to be the cultivation technique that was most aligned with the heavens in the world he currently was in. Zhongxian didn't say those words aloud, choosing to ask another question instead. Kongsha, does this mean that you have severed the heavens order from you? Indeed. I have torn the heavens order out of my body, similar to how I rejected my title as the celestial master teacher back then. One has to give up something in order to gain something. Only by paving your own way will you be able to ascend to greater heights, Kongsha said as he looked into the distance with a deep look in his eyes. Then, he turned to look at Zhongxian and smiled. I believe that you already have an idea of what you should do. Zhongxian fell deep in thought. Back then, if he hadn't rejected his identity as a celestial master teacher, he wouldn't have successfully advanced to become an ancient sage, and naturally, he wouldn't have managed to come to where he was either. Zhongxian was skeptical about the notion of abandoning the Library of Heaven's path, but there were some grains of truth in what Kongsha was saying. Was this the path he had to take in order to not be limited by the heavens and advance to greater heights? With many doubts bubbling in his mind, Zhongxian turned to Kongsha and asked, the heavens' imperfections is intricately connected to me as a being. How can I sever my connection with it? The Library of Heaven's path was connected to his soul, which was why he was able to use it even in his soul form. Even when he severed his soul to create his clone back then, the entirety of the Library of Heaven's path still remained with him. Given so, he couldn't imagine any way how he could possibly sever the Library of Heaven's path from him. Aren't I a living example of its feasibility? Kongsha chuckled. I have been through the process, so I am familiar with the procedures. It might sound unbelievable to you at the moment, but the procedures are actually extremely simple. In fact, you have just encountered something similar to it earlier. You are referring to the ritual which the chief of the Hall of Gods used? Zhongxian asked as his eyes widened slightly. Indeed, Kongsha nodded. I used that method to sever the heavens order away from me back then, and I suppose that's how the Hall of Gods figured out that it's possible for them to do the same to you in order to take away your heavens' imperfections. If there is such a huge loophole in the power of the heavens, why would the chief of the Hall of Gods desire to acquire my heavens' imperfections? Zhongxian was slightly stumped. Just as what Kongsha had said, a person who harnessed the heavens would eventually be assimilated, losing his sense of self. Most people would try to stay away from something as dangerous as that, so it didn't seem to make sense for the chief of the Hall of Gods to go to such lengths in order to acquire it. It's always those that we don't have that appears to be the best for us. Besides, everyone has their own pursuits. You and I, what we are aiming for is to ascend to the firmament and view the world from a higher angle. On the other hand, the chief of the Hall of Gods hopes to consolidate power on the Forsaken Continent. Given the differences in our goals, it's inevitable that what we hope to acquire would be different as well, Kongsha explained. I understand, Zhongxian nodded. The scope of one's ambitions would eventually dictate one's altitude. Those with greater ambitions would continuously strive for higher grounds, whereas those with humble dreams would limit themselves to what they could see and what was currently within reach. But the altar is currently with the Hall of Gods at the moment, right? It won't be easy to take it away from them, Zhongxian said with a deep frown. If the method of removing the Library of Heaven's Path was the same as what the chief of the Hall of Gods used, it was likely that they would need to make use of the Starchaser Palace's altar, and they would also need Du Qingyuan around to conduct the ritual. Given that those two were currently in the hands of the Hall of Gods at the moment, they wouldn't be able to do it at least in the short term. That's a needless worry. Look at what I have over here. With a light chuckle, Kongsha flicked his wrist. Who? An altar immediately materialized in the room. You took the altar from the Hall of Gods. Zhongxian could hardly believe his eyes. While fending against the assault of the 8 semidivinities to save him, the other party was actually still able to take away the altar as well. The other party's capabilities were truly terrifying, but just having the altar isn't sufficient. Based on what I know, the rituals are extremely intricate, and something of that level would surely require Palace Master Du. I have learned the ritual myself back then, and I'm confident that I would be able to carry it out even more smoothly than her, Kongsha replied confidently. Is that so? I guess there's nothing for me to nitpick anymore then. Shall we begin? Zhongxian burst into laughter before nodding in agreement. UN. Kongsha nodded. With a light wave of his hand, a pile of treasures fell on top of the altar. Muttering a huge chunk of obscure chants, a blue flame came to life on the altar. You may head over now, Kongsha commanded. Zhongxian nodded as he began walking toward the altar. However, in the next moment, Kongsha suddenly spoke up. Wait a moment. I need you to pass the pendant you are wearing over to me first. My pendant. Zhongxian halted his footsteps to look at Kongsha. I saw it during the ritual earlier. There is something off about the pendant you are wearing. It's binding the Library of Heaven's Path to you, preventing anything from severing its connection to you. I'm worried that it might hinder the ritual. Don't worry, I'll just hold it for you for the time being, and I'll return it to you at the end of the ritual, Kongsha explained. Zhongxian was a little hesitant, but eventually, he took out his pendant and passed it over. Taking the pendant away from Zhongxian, Kongsha's lips crept up into a smile as he kept it into his storage ring. Then, he urged Zhongxian to quickly make his way over to the altar. Zhongxian took a step forward, but in the next moment, he turned around with a hint of worry and asked, Will I be fine after the Library of Heaven's Path is removed from my body? He was well aware that the Library of Heaven's Path had become a part of himself. Even though Kongsha had reassured him that he was fine, he still couldn't help but worry about the matter. The fact that I'm standing here before you should answer your question. I understand your worries, but you'll be fine, Kongsha replied. Hearing those words, Zhongxian finally leaped up and landed above the flames. To prevent any accidents from happening, I'll have to seal you in place for the time being. It's to prevent the backlash of the heavens, Kongsha said as he raised his hand. Boom. Right after those words were spoken, a powerful might descended from the heavens. Chains similar to that of the Hall of Gods wrapped themselves rightly around Zhongxian before he could even react, binding him tightly against the altar. Caught off guard by that move, Zhongxian frowned. I'll be starting the ritual. With a smile on his lips, Kongsha flicked his hand once more, and another identical altar appeared beneath his feet. Blue flames rose from the altar too, swallowing Kongsha whole. No, that's not right. You are intending to take my Library of Heaven's Path and implant it over to your body, Zhongxian exclaimed. After seeing what Kongsha was doing, how could he possibly still remain oblivious to what the other party was up to? You realized it. However, It seems to be a little too late. Kongsha laughed coldly before he started chanting once more. The flames on the two altars swiftly intensified, growing brighter and brighter. Why? Didn't you say that the heavens would assimilate and turn one into a puppet? Zhongxian struggled, but he found that he was tightly bound to the altar. It was impossible for him to escape at all. I wasn't lying when I said that. However, without a stepping stone like that, how can one rise to greater heights? Do you think that it's really possible for an individual to become a god based on just his talents alone? How naive must you be to believe that one can tear open the doorway to the firmament that easily? Kongsha scoffed coldly. You are deluding yourself. I have been foiled once, and I am not going to make the same mistake again. Back then, I left a sliver of my will back at the Qiu Wu Palace in order to capture you. You were weak then, and I should have been able to succeed easily, but that darned woman beside you interfered with my plans. The Qiu Wu Palace? Zhongxian was stunned. Memories were slowly floating back to him. Back then, in the crystal ball that controlled the Qiu Wu Palace, he encountered the will left behind by Kongsha. The latter was in the midst of giving him a warning when he suddenly raised his palm. But before anything could happen, Luo Ruoxin suddenly called for him, bringing him back to the real world. Back then, he had a lingering suspicion that Luo Ruoxin had done it intentionally in order to prevent him from hearing what Kongsha had to say. However, he eventually chose to trust Luo Ruoxin on that matter, so he chose not to think too much into it. But based on what he was hearing right now, it turned out that Luo Ruoxin was trying to save him. If not for Luo Ruoxin snapping him out of it, he might have had his library of Heaven's Path taken away from him back then. It might have been the end of him if that were to happen. His cultivation was still very weak back then, such that the ritual could have very well caused the dissipation of his soul. Several other thoughts swiftly arose in Zhongxian's mind, and he quickly asked, does that mean that the descent of the ancient sage Fordan deity on the Kungsu domain back then was your doing too? Back then, when the ancient sage Fordan deity crawled down from the azure, he had mentioned something about a sect leader. After learning of the existence of the 6 sects, he had been wondering if the culprit had been one of them. After all, breaching the dimension barrier was no easy feat even if it had been weakened. An ancient sage Fordan cultivator shouldn't have been able to do it so easily, especially when there was no ritual on the other side to summon him. However, as he went from one sect to the other, none of them seemed to have been behind this matter, and that had left him a little puzzled. However, if the ethereal hall was the one behind it, everything would make sense. After all, as someone who had come from the master-teacher continent, Kongsha definitely knew about the pathway leading to the Kungsu domain. That could also be why the deity was so interested in acquiring Kong Xiao's bloodline, which was said to be the purest bloodline from Kongsha over the past tens of thousands of years. If that deity had succeeded, his talents would surely have been brought to greater heights, and he would have been even more highly regarded by Kongsha himself. You are quite sharp. I was indeed the one who dispatched him to guard that entrance, Kongsha admitted to the matter. But on the other side of the passageway are your students and descendants. Do their life and death mean nothing to you at all? Zhongxian was unable to believe what he was hearing. The man before him was known to have used even the body of his students in order to prevent the Mercury-like spiritual energy from falling onto the master-teacher continent and causing great devastation. Not only so, he also tasked the 100 schools of philosophers to guard the Kungsu domain as well. The reason why he did so was to ensure the better development of mankind. So, why would he go the extent of dispatching someone down to kill even Kong Xiao? Zhongxian could understand why Kongsha wanted to deal with him. After all, the Library of Heaven's Path was an invaluable treasure. If the other party could acquire it together with the Heaven's Order, he would have nothing to fear anymore. It would provide him with the impetus he required for push a higher level. Perhaps, he might even be able to break open the dimension barrier and ascend up to the firmament. It would be expecting too much of Kongsha to presume that he was completely selfless. However, it didn't make sense that he would leave his offspring and disciples to the lurch. As the world's teacher who was known for his benevolence on the master-teacher continent, it was unthinkable for him to change so much just because he had headed to the Azure. It was almost as if he was a different person. As this thought surfaced in his mind, Zhongxian narrowed his eyes. You You aren't Kongsha. Chapter 2073 Facing Kongsha Atrocious. How dare you say that I'm not Kongsha? Casting aside the refined disposition he had been putting on till now, Kongsha looked at Zhongxian with an expression warped with savagery. Why am I not him? Why don't you tell me just what is it that makes me so different from him? Kongsha is someone who embraces the entire world with his benevolence. He would never do those things you have done. Zhongxian shook his head as he replied. He had never met Kongsha in person before, but his deeds and beliefs clearly created great ripples across the world, allowing one to fathom who he was as a person. It was indeed possible for a person to put on a persona, but it was impossible for someone to maintain a persona for so many years, especially when one had reached the peak of the world. Embraces the whole world with his benevolence. Ha ha ha, what a joke. Even if I kill you right here and right now, the whole world would still think of me as a benevolent man. Kongsha sneered coldly. Kongsha hastened his chants, inducing the flames on the altar to crackle furiously. It felt like Zhongxian was going to be swallowed whole. However, instead of panicking, Zhongxian calmed down instead. With a look of pity in his eyes, he sighed, all along, I thought that you were someone worthy of respect. I guess I was wrong. Whatever library you have in you will be mine very soon. Once you lose your control over the heavens, you will suffer the backlash of the heavens and be crushed by it. Your flesh and bones will be ground to dust. Say all you want, but nothing will change the outcome anymore, Kongsha replied with a smirk, paying no heed to what Zhongxian was saying at all. Zhongxian was someone who cultivated the Heaven's Path divine art. It was with the protection of the Library of Heaven's Path that the heavens had been unable to do anything about this aberrance of nature. However, the moment Zhongxian lost his Library of Heaven's Path, he would immediately be crushed by the rules. There was no way he would be able to survive this. Is that so? A nonchalant voice echoed in the air. Kongsha was taken aback. He could see that the voice wasn't coming from Zhongxian at all, so who could be the one speaking then? Alarmed, he quickly turned around, only to see another Zhongxian standing not too far away with a disappointed look on his face. All along, while he did not share the same reverence for Kongsha as the rest on the master-teacher continent, the other party was indeed someone that he had respected deeply. To think that the other party turned out to be such a person instead. You. On the other hand, Kongsha would have never expected that another Zhongxian would appear all of a sudden. He couldn't help but widen his eyes in disbelief. The Hall of Gods has been trying to capture me all along. How could I possibly not prepare a hand before stepping in its trap? The one which you have been trying to extract, the Library of Heaven's Path, has been my clone all along, Zhongxian replied with a shake of his head. Prior to entering the Hall of Gods, he swapped places with his clone, choosing to house himself temporarily inside the storage ring. It was for this reason that he was able to remain unharmed even while Kongsha was jumping through dimensions with him. The reason why he had his clone to go along with whatever Kongsha was doing was to uncover the true answer from him. It was just that he didn't think that the answer he received would be so disappointing. Very well. Very well. I would have expected nothing less than a person chosen by the heavens. Of course, it should have never been so easy. It couldn't possibly have been so easy. Kongsha murmured with a frenzied expression on his face. But it doesn't make a difference at all. Did you think that I would allow you to leave this area safely, especially now that you have appeared before me on your own accord? Boom. With a light step, Kongsha walked out from the flames, and a powerful aura rippled across the entire hall. It felt like the surrounding space would cave in at any moment and collapse on them. Kongsha had single-handedly defeated 8 semidivinities back at the Hall of Gods, which meant that he was at least several times stronger than Zhongxian. Don't you think that it goes both ways? Why would I appear before you just to run away? Zhongxian scoffed. Since everything is pretty much out now, why don't you satisfy the final curiosity of mine? Has the Hall of Gods already fallen under your control as well? From Fu Chunzi to the illusory chief of the Hall of Gods, the silhouette of Kongsha could be seen all around the Hall of Gods. I have massacred the chief and the warriors of the Hall of Gods. They are pawns which the firmament has dispatched here in order to suppress the Azure, so all of them deserve to die. I will create a new world in the Azure. I will lead this world to unprecedented greatness. The Hall of Gods and the Ethereal Hall are both under my control, so no matter where you run to, you will never be able to escape from me." Kongsha laughed. The current chief of the Hall of Gods was him, and the one who kidnapped Du Qingyuan was also him. The main reason behind that was because he wanted to steal Zhongxian's library of Heaven's Path and make it his own. "I don't have any more questions," Zhongxian said. Then, he turned to his clone on the altar and shouted, "What are you fooling around for? Hurry up and get down here." "Yes, yes." The body of the clone immediately became as flimsy as noodle strands, allowing him to slip through the metal chains that bound him and move over to Zhongxian's side. At the same time, the clone drove his zhenqi as well, causing a powerful aura to burst forth from him. Just like Kongsha, he had reached semi-divinity realm as well. Hula. After that, Zhongxian brought out the blackback tortoise, the 3 shark brothers, the serpentine dragon and the others, as well as all of the weapons he had in his possession. Clap. Clap. Wonderful. You sure have prepared many trump cards in advance, Kongsha nodded as he clapped his hands resoundingly. However, it's still far from sufficient. I am the man who was known as the world's teacher. As he spoke, he took a step forward and pressed his palm downward. The blackback tortoise, the 3 shark brothers, and the other beasts were immediately forced to the ground, unable to take a step at all. They were all at semi-divinity realm, but these beasts were simply far too weak compared to Kongsha, such that they weren't even worth a fight. They aren't enough in your eyes, but in my view, you aren't anything either. The clone burst into laughter. Su. It dashed forward and sent a punch right toward Kongsha. Peng peng. As the clone traded blows with Kongsha, the surrounding space immediately began shattering under the immense strain. Even when they were at the same cultivation realm, Zhongxian was no match for his clone, not to mention that his clone had already reached semi-divinity realm. In terms of strength, his clone was nowhere weaker than that of Kongsha. Furthermore, the clone's indestructible body made it a huge headache to deal with. Despite Kongsha's overwhelming strength, he actually found himself unable to do anything about the clone in the short term. How can a clone like you possibly be so powerful? Kongsha could hardly believe his eyes. He had been paying close attention to Zhongxian ever since the latter ascended to the Azure. Even though the various attempts he had made to capture Zhongxian eventually ended in failure, he still had a rough gauge as to just how powerful Zhongxian was, but he was never aware that Zhongxian actually had a clone, and he would have never imagined that his clone would be so powerful at that. Having lived for several thousand years, he could be considered as a man who stood at the very peak of the Azure, making him an existence unrivaled by the others. Otherwise, there was no way he could have managed to massacre the experts of the Hall of Gods and replace all of them. But despite so, he actually found himself unable to do anything about this clone. Just what in the world was happening over here? Get him together. Paying no heed to Kongsha's shock, Zhongxian waved his hand and undone the formation that weighed down on the beasts in the area, allowing them to return to their feet. Hong Long. The 8 semi-divinity realm beasts and the dozen semi-divinity artifacts formed a massive formation that constantly attacked Kongsha's blind spots. Kongsha was already fighting a close battle with the clone, so how could he cope with a bunch of disruptors eyeing him closely from the sidelines to constantly disrupt him whenever he revealed an opening? In just a few moments, he was already struck squarely in the chest, causing him to be pushed back before crashing heavily onto the ground. Kill him. With a strike finally connecting, the clone immediately rushed forward to follow up with another punch. The might of his strike felt strong enough to rip the space into 2. You bastards. If not for the fact that I have been suppressed by him for several thousand years and haven't fully recovered yet, did you think that the likes of you would have been able to injure me? There's no way I'll be killed by the lot of you on my own home ground. Who? With a quick leap, Kongsha instantaneously traversed through space and disappeared from the spot. Quick, we need to leave. Along with Kongsha's disappearance, Zhongxian immediately sensed that something was amiss, so he swiftly kept all of the artifacts and beasts back into his storage ring and tamed beast sack respectively before entering his own storage ring himself. Who? Carrying the storage ring, his clone swiftly dashed in a certain direction. That was where the weakest point of the guardian formation of the ethereal hall. Zhongxian had told his clone about it earlier through their telepathic connection. Boom. But before his clone could tear through the formation and leave, the entire ethereal hall suddenly burst apart, causing devastating infernos and powerful shockwaves to sweep into the surroundings, threatening to tear the world apart. The clone that had yet to leave was immediately sliced into two by one of the spatial rifts rippling into the surroundings. Who? The two halves of the clone quickly linked back together before continuing to rush his way out. It was fortunate that the one who was struck was the clone. If it had been Zhongxian instead, that single strike would have really killed him through and through. After escaping to safe grounds, Zhongxian came out of his storage ring. Looking back at the tattered space where the ethereal hall used to exist, Zhongxian felt goosebumps rising all over his body. That bastard actually set up so many destructive formations in his own base of operations. He's far more vicious than I have thought. If not for his swift reaction, all of them could have been obliterated along with the ethereal hall. Quick, take a look around the area to see where he has gone to. We mustn't allow him to escape, Zhongxian instructed. Nodding his head, his clone quickly searched the area. Along with the explosion, the headquarters of the ethereal hall was pretty much wiped off the face of the world. It was hard to tell whether it was empty from the start, or that everyone inside had died along with the explosion. He has probably escaped. The clone had searched the area, but he was unable to find Kongsha. As powerful as Kongsha was, he was only able to equal Zhongxian's clone in prowess. If he had to face so many semi-divinity realm beasts and artifacts on top of that, there was a good chance that he would be the one to be defeated at the very end. Thus, after exploding the Hall of Gods, he immediately fled the area. This left Zhongxian feeling deeply helpless. He tried scanning the area with the Eye of Insight as well, but he was unable to find any traces of Kongsha around. It was indeed very likely that the latter had managed to escape. He had thought of many possibilities beforehand, but he didn't think that Kongsha would actually run away from him. That was the world's teacher, the strongest existence of the master-teacher continent. He was someone whom no one dared to disrespect for the past tens of thousands of years. He couldn't imagine just what had happened for the other party to become like this. In fact, if he were to send the news back to the master-teacher continent, it was likely that the master-teacher pavilion and 100 schools of philosophers would view him as their greatest enemy for besmirching Kongsha. Your pendant. The clone turned to look at Zhongxian. Kongsha had escaped, but the pendant was still in the other party's hands. That's a fake. After finding out that Fu Chunzi was colluding with the Hall of Gods, I have been suspecting that there's something wrong with the ethereal hall. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had you substitute me before entering the Hall of Gods, Zhongxian replied. He had never spoken his thoughts aloud, but that didn't hinder speculations from arising in his mind. Since he doubted Kongsha's intentions, why in the world would he entrust Luo Ruoxin's pendant to the other party's hand? Luo Ruoxin had instructed him sternly to not take off the pendant no matter what happened. He wasn't so foolish as to hand it over just to bait Kongsha. You managed to fool Kongsha with a fake, the clone was slightly surprised. Even he was unaware of this matter. Zhongxian had kept this a secret from him as well. In fact, Zhongxian had never shared any information regarding Luo Ruoxin with him before. I was also perplexed about that as well. My guess is that he doesn't know where the pendant comes from and what kind of strength it wields either. Zhongxian shook his head and said. To be honest, all he did was to place his blood essence inside the fake pendant. He had fully expected Kongsha to see through it, but the latter simply took his word for it. Most likely, unlike the Library of Heaven's Path, the Heaven's Order that Kongsha possessed was unable to discern the authenticity and flaws of objects. At this moment, a voice suddenly echoed in Zhongxian's mind. Have you not noticed it? The person who spoke was Vicious, who had just reached semi-divinity realm through cultivating on the circular platform too. Noticed it? Zhongxian frowned. That fellow, he isn't the real Kongsha, Vicious replied. Chapter 2074 The Use of the Altar. Those words made Zhongxian frown. Their soul auras are identical, and his comprehension of battle techniques has reached the same level as Heaven's Path battle techniques too. Zhongxian didn't want to believe the other party was the world's teacher from the depths of his heart as well, but no matter how he looked at it, they were indeed the same person. It might be possible for someone to copy Kong Shi's soul aura, but surely there should be no way for one to copy the latter's comprehension of battle techniques as well? If not for his clone's breakthrough and the aid of so many semi-divinity realm beasts and artifacts, victory might not have been theirs to claim. To put it in other words, the other party was no weaker than him, who had cultivated the Heaven's Path divine art. If the other party wasn't the real Kong Shi, honestly, Zhongxian could think of no one else who could be so powerful. Furthermore, he was unable to peer through the other party's real identity through the library of Heaven's Path as well. Other than someone who possessed the Heaven's Order, who else could possibly conceal themselves before the library of Heaven's Path? I have crossed hands with Kong Shi many times in my lifetime, so I know very well just what kind of person he is. Even though the person whom you have encountered earlier appears to be identical to Kong Shi, I am certain that that fellow isn't him. If he was really Kong Shi, there's no way your clones and tamed beasts would have been able to defeat him so easily, Vicious said. Those words immediately sent Zhongxian deep in thought. Back then, I captured a disciple of his quietly in order to lure him into a trap. He could have simply feigned ignorance so as to not put himself in danger, but he still charged right into my trap without any hesitation. Despite knowing that there was a real threat of death, he was still willing to charge forward bravely. He has been my nemesis for my entire lifetime, but at the same time, I respect him deeply for his character. There's no way he would have did earlier, Vicious said. Furthermore, if what that fellow said is true, there's no way he would try to take your heaven's imperfections when he already has the heaven's order. He would be digging his own grave if he tries to acquire 2 fragments of the heavens at once. Zhongxian nodded in agreement. Even the threat from a single fragment of the heavens was enough to put one in great danger. If Kong Shi were to acquire the heaven's imperfections on top of that, there was a good chance that he would end up being assimilated by the heavens. But if the other party wasn't Kong Shi, who else could he possibly be? There's no point thinking so deeply into it. For the time being, I should focus on saving Du Qingyuan. She should know a little more about the matter. The altar had been taken away by Kong Shi, so there was no reason for him to linger in the area anymore. Zhongxian quickly found the exit to the folded space and left this so-called headquarters of the ethereal hall, returning back to the Forsaken Continent. When he finally stepped through the passageway, he found that his surroundings were surprisingly familiar. He was floating in the midst of the ocean, and roughly 200 li away, there was a towering pillar, the heaven-anchoring boulder. Who could have thought that the headquarters of the elusive ethereal hall would actually be located so close to heaven-anchoring boulder? It was probably because none of the 6 sects had thought that such a thing would be possible that they had never tried checking the vicinity. Zhongxian quickly made his way over to the heaven-anchoring boulder and scaled to its peak. Just as he had expected, the azure bridge had already vanished, and the faraway Hall of Gods had disappeared into the depths of the dark sky. Sect leader Zhong, you are fine? Seeing that Zhongxian had returned alive, Han Jianqiu, Kue Xiao, and the others were slightly stunned for a moment before heaving a deep sigh of relief. By the time the azure bridge retracted, Elder Hongwu and the others, who had successfully advanced to semi-divinity realm, had already returned back to the heaven-anchoring boulder. However, no matter how they waited, Zhongxian simply didn't appear. They thought that the young man had encountered some kind of danger and was gone for good, but who could have thought that he would appear from the bottom of the heaven-anchoring boulder instead of from the azure bridge? It's a long story. Where is Bai Xianxing and Jiyu Zhueyun? Zhongxian scanned the area and asked. Those 2 heads, who had defected to the ethereal hall, were nowhere to be seen on the heaven-anchoring boulder. They left hurriedly not too long after you have gotten onto the azure bridge. They didn't specify the details of where they are heading to, so we aren't too sure either. Han Jianqiu replied. They left shortly after we got onto the azure bridge. From the looks of it, it seemed like those 2, one way or another, found out that he had managed to kill the geniuses of their sects, so they made sure to escape in advance. Given that more than 20 hours had passed since then, it would be impossible to find them again now. Do you know what other ways there are to enter the Hall of Gods other than through the azure bridge? Zhongxian asked. The others shook their heads in response. If they knew, they wouldn't have to resort to waiting 100 years for each opportunity. There must be other paths to the Hall of Gods other than the azure bridge. Zhongxian thought deeply. The fact that Kong Shi was able to enter the Hall of Gods and massacre the Hall of Gods showed that he had a way of entering the Hall of Gods without going through the Azure Bridge. Just the fact that he appeared earlier to save him was an anomaly in itself. The Azure Bridge shouldn't allow anyone whose cultivation had reached semi-divinity realm and was over 100 years of age to step onto it. But in any case, since the Azure Bridge had disappeared, there was no longer any point in remaining in the area. So, Zhongxian and the others quickly flew down the heaven-anchoring boulder. Before they could return back to the sea level, Wu Chen suddenly approached them. In order not to reveal his strength, he didn't scale to the top of the heaven-anchoring boulder together with the others. Instead, he had been standing guard here. Seeing Wu Chen, a thought suddenly surfaced in Zhongxian's mind, and he asked, "Wu Chen, has Palace Master Du ever mentioned any other ways into the Hall of Gods other than the Azure Bridge?" Han Jiangqiu and the others might be unaware of the other possible routes, but Du Qingyuan might just have a clue. "She has never mentioned anything like that before." Wu Chen shook his head. Zhongxian could only sigh helplessly. It seemed like he was pinning his hopes too much on Du Qingyuan. If the latter really knew that much, the Starchaser Palace should have long risen to an existence above the 6 sects. At the same time, it wouldn't have been so helpless when the Hall of Gods attacked it as well. Then, other than the evanescent boots, do you know any ways one could traverse through space? Zhongxian turned to Han Jianqiu and the others and asked. Now that he thought about it, Kong Shi was wearing the evanescent boots when he traveled from the Hall of Gods back to the Ethereal Hall's headquarters. Perhaps, the key to getting through the barrier left behind the gods and entering the Hall of Gods lay in it. Traversing through space? It's said to be a feat which only gods are able to pull off. Han Jianqiu and the others replied. A feat that only gods are able to pull off. Zhongxian sighed deeply once more. If it was possible to reach the level of gods on the Azure, that Kong Shi would have surely long achieved it. He wouldn't have to bother resorting to stealing his library of Heaven's Path. After being through the Azure Bridge, he realized that reaching the level of the gods didn't just bank on one's talents. Most likely, this world was lacking in a certain quality that was required for one to make the final breakthrough. Without that quality, semi-divinity realm would be the invisible ceiling. No matter how much one cultivated, it would be impossible to overcome this limitation. Just as Zhongxian was still helpless as to how he could return back to the Hall of Gods and save Du Qingyuan, a voice suddenly sounded in the air. Actually, I think I know of a plausible solution to do it. The one who had spoken was no other than Wu Chen. Zhongxian immediately turned his gaze over and said, "Tell me about it." Wu Chen began speaking. Under normal circumstances, it's indeed impossible to traverse through space. However, if you were to tap into the mysterious powers of a ritual, it might be possible to pull it off. That was also how Milady managed to overcome 2-dimension barriers simultaneously back then. That answer made Zhongxian slap his own face. How could he possibly have overlooked it when the answer had been right in front of him all along? In terms of overcoming dimension barriers, what could possibly be more efficient than the rituals of the otherworldly demonic tribe? Even Luo Ruoxin, as the spirit god, resorted to using such a method in order to traverse through the dimension barriers of the Azure and the Master-Teacher continent. Considering how he was using it to traverse through space in the same world, the difficulty should be much lower. Wu Chen pondered for a moment before adding on, however, such a method would require an altar on both sides. The trick is basically to establish a connection link between the 2 altars so as to send a person from the location of one altar to the other. Back when Zhongxian was on the Master-Teacher continent, while he was dealing with the copper-masked Qingtian Emperor, he used this trick in order to send people from one altar to the other. If that's the case, it might really be possible to pull it off. It could be possible for us to enter the Hall of Gods even without the Azure Bridge, Zhongxian said excitedly. He had no idea where Kong Shi would escape to, but out of safety considerations, there was a good chance that he would return back to the safe Hall of Gods. If so, Zhongxian would be able to create a direct route to teleport him right over there. No matter what, it would be too dangerous to keep that Kong Shi alive. Who could predict when the latter would make his next move against him? Let's head to the Starchaser Palace, Zhongxian instructed without any hesitation. Before long, Zhongxian was already in the Starchaser Palace, and Elder Jiang Yarrow was standing right before him. "This is the altar I used in order to impersonate our palace master," Elder Jiang Yarrow said as she took out the altar, as well as the various offerings required to hold a ritual. As a close aide of Du Qingyuan, she knew a lot about the rituals of the otherworldly demonic tribe. It didn't take long for the offerings to burn up, and a unique aura drifted forth from the altar. Zhongxian quickly made his way to the top of the altar, waiting for the moment that he would be teleported to the Hall of Gods. However, even as all of the offerings were burned to cinders, he still remained standing on the same spot. The ritual didn't work. Elder Jiang Yarrow quickly tested it another time, but it didn't work out either. In the end, she shook her head and said, "It seems like only our guardian artifact is capable of pulling off teleportation. The other altars can still be used for conducting minor rituals, but the more major rituals are beyond its capability." The altar that Kongshe had taken away was the guardian artifact of the Starchaser Palace. It went without saying that it wielded unique abilities. Considering how their goal was to transport a heavenly high immortal across a barrier created by the gods, they would definitely require something more than an ordinary altar. That won't work. It's very likely that the altar is in the Hall of Gods right now. Zhongxian's posture slumped a little from disappointment. If that was the case, it would mean that their plan of getting to the Hall of Gods through a ritual wouldn't work out. "Young master, I know where we can find an altar that could be used to hold the ritual. If we return to the Master-Teacher continent and bring the altar used by the Spirit Tribe over, I believe that we should be able to conduct the ritual fine," Wu Chen suddenly interjected. "You are referring to the altar that you used to summon Palace Master Du back then?" Zhongxian was stunned. Indeed. Given that the altar was able to bring Luo Ruoxin from the Azure to the Master-Teacher continent, even if it was not up to par to the guardian artifact of the Starchaser Palace, its effects should still be spectacular. If they could bring it over to the Azure to hold the ritual, it might just be possible to teleport him into the Hall of God. It was just that. The altar was still in the Master-Teacher continent, so how was he supposed to get it? Back then, Luo Ruoxin only managed to descend to the Master-Teacher continent through a ritual summoning her. Furthermore, despite being a god, her cultivation still plunged all the way to Saint Realm as she fell to the Master-Teacher continent. Considering how he was only at Heavenly High Immortal Realm at the moment, even if he knew that it was possible to use that altar, there was no way he could head down to the Master-Teacher continent. That's right. And in fact it might not be that difficult to return back to the Master-Teacher continent anymore too, Wu Chen said. Zhongxian immediately looked toward Wu Chen. When Milady first descended to the Master-Teacher continent, the pathway between the Azure and the Master-Teacher continent was sealed. There was no route for her to get to the Master-Teacher continent, so she had no choice to barge her way through the dimension barrier. However, after the emergence of the Temple of Confucius, the spatial seal that blocked the passageway between the two worlds began eroding. In fact, when you were making your way over to the Azure, the passageway has already been re-established. As long as you return via the pathway you used to come here, it shouldn't be too difficult for you to head back down to the Master-Teacher continent. Chapter 2075 We Are Here. Zhongxian nodded. Thinking about it for a while, there was indeed some truth to what Wu Chen was saying. The spatial passageway that linked the Master-Teacher continent to the Azure had been sealed by two things, namely the Temple of Confucius and the great formation in the Kungsu domain that made use of the corpses of Kongshe's direct disciples. Under normal circumstances, the passageway was so tightly sealed that it would not be an exaggeration to say that it was non-existent. However, when the Great Codex of Spring and Autumn emerged, the seal of the Temple of Confucius unraveled. That inadvertently weakened the seal in the Kungsu domain, thus resulting in the deity being able to force his way into the Kungsu domain. That was also how Zhongxian had managed to bypass the dimension barrier and enter the Azure. As long as he found the passageway once more, it would indeed be possible for him to return to the Master-Teacher continent. With the resilience of his current body, the spatial turbulence of the passageway was no longer able to affect him. However, it probably won't be too easy to find the entrance, Zhongxian said. Even if he knew the general location, it was likely that Kongshe had hidden it in some kind of folded space, making it incredibly difficult to find it unless he knew the exact location. After all, Kong Shi's very ability of Heaven's Order granted him incomparable skills in manipulating space. It would indeed be difficult to find the entrance in the Azure, but young master, you should know where the entrance is from the master-teacher continent side, right? Wu Chen asked with a smile. Of course. Zhong Xian nodded. It was in the Kungsu domain, where the 100 schools of philosophers resided. Since that's the case, we can always find a way to communicate with the current sovereign Chen Yong and have him hold a ritual. Through the power of the summoning ritual, we'll be able to find the entrance and return to the master-teacher continent, Wu Chen said. Yes, you're right. Zhong Xian nodded in agreement. That was indeed the most feasible plan that they had at the moment. As for how we can communicate with the incumbent sovereign Chen Yong, that isn't an issue at all. Starchaser Palace should have a unique communication channel, Wu Chen added. So, Zhong Xian quickly called Elder Jiang Yarou and First Elder Zhao Yu over and filled them in on the details. After understanding what Zhong Xian wanted to achieve, First Elder Zhao Yu replied, "We do have a way to communicate with the master-teacher continent. However, without an altar, we'll only be able to send messages over. That's enough. This is the message that I want to send over to the current sovereign Chen Yong. Tell him to hold the ritual a month from now," Zhong Xian said as he sent a sliver of thought over. First Elder Zhao Yu clasped her fist and said, "I'll have it done right now." Starchaser Palace would often communicate with the otherworldly demonic tribe of the master-teacher continent. It was their tight coordination that had allowed Luo Ruoxin to successfully overcome the two-dimension barriers one after another. After settling this issue, Zhong Xian beckoned Wu Chen over and said, "Let's go." "Where are we going?" Wu Chen asked in confusion. "I was in the territories of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion when I first regained consciousness after reaching the Azure, so I believe that the location of the dimension passageway is in that area. This way, we'll be able to quickly make our way over once Sovereign Chen Yong conducts the ritual." Zhong Xian was not too sure of the exact location of the dimension passageway, but the first place he was at when he regained consciousness was in the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion's Shenjiang city. If his guess was not wrong, the dimension passageway should be somewhere around there. With the exception of the serpentine dragon and the 9-headed fiery phoenix, Zhong Xian left all of his tamed beast at Starchaser Palace. This way, if Kong Shi attempted to attack while he was gone, they would at least have some forces to protect themselves. After this was done, Zhong Xian and Wu Chen rode on the serpentine dragon and the 9-headed fiery phoenix and quickly headed toward the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. The serpentine dragon and 9-headed fiery phoenix had reached the semi-divinity realm, and they were beasts that specialized in speed. Thus, riding on them was much faster than traveling on their own. Within just 3 days, they had already entered the territory of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. Zhong Xian had originally taken almost 20 days to make his way over to Starchaser Palace, but riding on the serpentine dragon, he took only 3 days. The speed that semi-divinity realm beasts were able to move at was frightening. "We have finally arrived at Shenjiang City," Zhong Xian muttered. Putting the 2 tamed beasts back into his tamed beast sack, Zhong Xian and Wu Chen made sure to conceal their cultivation before strolling along the wide streets of Shenjiang City leisurely. A month had only passed since Zhong Xian was last there, so there had not been many changes on the surface. After Shuigan's death, the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion had nominated a new person to serve as the Lord of Shenjiang City. "Have you heard? The friend which joined the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion together with Dan Xiaotian seems to be called Zhong Xian as well." "Wait a moment. Are you saying that Dan Xiaotian's friend has become the head of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, Starchaser Palace, the Myriad Beasts Hall, and the 7-Star Pavilion?" "That's exactly what I'm saying. My little uncle's second aunt's third cousin's uncle is a menial disciple at the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. I met him at the Ethereal Hall just yesterday, and he told me all about it personally. He said that the current sect leader of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion is none other than Dan Xiaotian's friend. If I recall correctly, he's only in his early 20s, right? Yet, he's already the head of 4 sects. My gosh, why is Dan Xiaotian's luck so good?" "That's exactly what I was thinking. I heard that Dan Xiaotian has already acknowledged Zhong Xian as his teacher. He simply saved a random man off the streets, and that man eventually turned out to be the head of 4 sects. Wow, I really want to go out there and start saving some people. Ha ha ha. You know, my neighbor, Zhong Yuanwei, really did just that. Inspired by the story, he recently picked up a few severely injured people off the streets and treated them, hoping dearly that the same thing would happen to them. So far, he has saved 4 girls and 5 boys, and all of them happen to be in their late teens. I saw them when I visited their house, and hell, those girls are really gorgeous. Even the guys look valiant and dashing. I was almost convinced that they would achieve great things in the future too. Oh, how's their cultivation? I don't really know about that. I heard that they are currently very feeble due to the severity of their injuries. It has been a few days since I visited my neighbor, so I don't know what the latest news is. It's probably impossible for them to be as talented and capable as sect leader Zhong Xian, but I guess it's still worth a try. There's always that little chance that you might just luck out. Well, I really should start walking around the area and help out those in need. Duh. If you keep yourself cooped up at home for heavens know what, you'll never get around to achieving anything great. Such discussions could be heard in the vicinity. Hearing these vibrant conversations around him, Zhong Xian could not help but smile a little. It was a wondrous feeling, returning to the leisurely pace of life after dealing with the Hall of Gods and all those troublesome issues. That being said, news seemed to spread really fast on the Forsaken Continent. It had been less than 10 days since his inauguration, but even a remote place like Shenjiang City had already caught wind of the matter. Young master, where are we heading to next? Wu Chen asked, completely unaffected by the chatters around them. He was already used to it. It felt like the young master would naturally become the center of attention no matter where he went. It was that way on the master-teacher continent, and it seemed like it would be no different in the Azure. We'll just wait around for the time being. I told First Elder Zhao Yu to instruct the spirit tribe to hold the ritual in a month, which is roughly equivalent to 3 days here. We should be receiving the summons soon. For the time being, let's find a quiet place to rest, Zhong Xian said. There was a 110 difference in the flow of time between the Azure and the Master-Teacher continent. A month on the Master-Teacher continent would roughly equate to 3 days here. Wu Chen took a look around the area before pointing in a certain direction. Why don't we head over to the mountain over there? Zhong Xian nodded in agreement. Shenjiang City was very close to nature. There was a river and a mountain range not too far away. So, the two of them left the city and scaled the mountain. With a wave of his hand, Zhong Xian took out a large handful of formation flags and planted them all around. The formation that he had set up was a sensory formation that he had specially designed on his way there. It was somewhat similar to the signal towers in his previous life. It served to locate and amplify the summoning energy coming from the altar on the other side so that he would be able to find his way around more easily. After setting up the formation, Zhong Xian took out a halberd and planted it at the direct center of the formation. Then, he tied a ribbon around it. With a stomp of his foot, the formation whirred into action. The red string simply drooped downward quietly, not moving in the least. Let's just wait around. I reckon that the ritual hasn't started yet, Zhong Xian said. It was impossible to sustain the ritual for too long due to the staggering amount of tributes one required. Furthermore, even if they were able to sustain the ritual for 3 days on the Master-Teacher continent, that would only equate to roughly 7 hours in the Azure. As such, it was important for him to make preparations accordingly so that he could locate the spatial passageway as quickly as possible. Sitting quietly on the spot, Zhongzhan continued to work on the cultivation technique that he was developing for his breakthrough to the semi-divinity realm. Meanwhile, in a spacious residence in Shenjiang City, a young lady with delicate features slowly opened her eyes. "Young miss, you are finally awake," a maid exclaimed in relief. "Where is this place? Where am I?" The young lady frowned slightly. She struggled to get up as she scanned her surroundings warily. The residence looked extremely foreign. It was unlike what she had seen before. "You are in Shenjiang City. Our old master, Zhong Yuanwei, saved you and brought you all here," the maid replied. "You all? The young lady was stunned for a moment before her eyes lit up in excitement. You found the others that were with me? Where are they? There are 8 people with you. They are still unconscious at the moment, so we laid them down to rest in the other rooms, the maid replied. All 8 of them are here. The young lady heaved a sigh of relief. She immediately struggled out of the bed and said, Quick, bring me to see them. This. The maid felt that the young lady was still a little too weak to be moving around, but the young lady seemed to be very insistent on the matter. Thus, she carefully supported the young lady out of the room. Barely after they walked out of the room, they saw that the severely injured, unconscious group of 8 had all awakened, and they were currently standing in the courtyard. Senior. Upon seeing the young lady, all of them quickly clasped their fists and greeted her. Yuen, let's take a seat over there, shall we? The young lady said as she gestured for everyone to take a seat in the cooling gazebo. It's great that we managed to survive the ordeal, but our injuries are more severe than we thought. I took a look at my internal condition earlier, and there are signs of spatial tears in my body. It'll be hard for me to recover to full health without several years' recuperation, the young lady said grimly. It's the same for me. I guess we are all in the same plight. The 8 of them quickly checked their conditions, and they replied with solemn voices. Our teacher must have sustained the same injuries when he entered the Azure a year ago. I wonder if he has recovered from his injuries, yet how should we go about looking for him? Knowing the conditions of her body, the young lady could not help but mutter worriedly. Our teacher is a person of great capabilities. I believe that he'll be fine, another young lady in the group replied to her concerns. Indeed, our teacher is a person of great capabilities. The young lady nodded in agreement. Wait a moment, I sense that something is amiss. There seems to be some difference between the flow of time in the Azure compared to that of the master-teacher continent, one of the young men in the group suddenly said with a deep frown. There's a difference in the flow of time? The crowd was stunned by that remark. That young man's bloodline ability was related to time, so he had exceptional innate sensitivity toward the temporal laws of the world. Yuen. Give me a moment. I'll do a quick calculation, the young man said as he closed his eyes. Roughly 3 minutes later, he opened his eyes once more and said, There's a difference of roughly 10 times in the flow of time between the Azure and the master-teacher continent. In other words, a day in the Azure equates to 10 days on the master-teacher continent. If Zhongxian was there, he would have surely recognized those 9 people. They were the direct disciples whom he had taken in back when he was still on the master-teacher continent. Zhao Yue, Liu Yang, Wang Ying, Zheng Yang, Yuan Dao, Lu Chong, Wei Ruyan, Zhong Zhouxiao, and Kong Shiyao. It had been slightly more than a month since Zhongxian entered the Azure, and in the meantime, a year had already passed in the master-teacher continent. Within such a long period of time, everyone had managed to cultivate up to ancient sage 4-dan consummation, and they had found that they were not able to advance any further. On top of that, there was absolutely no news from their teacher, which stoked their worries. Eventually, they could not sit still. Thus, they gathered together in the Kungsu domain to look for Kong Shiyao, and they decided that they would enter the spatial passageway and head to the Azure. The person whom everyone greeted as senior earlier was naturally Zhao Yue, and the one who had noticed the time difference between the Azure and the master-teacher continent was Zhong Zhouxiao. A difference of 10 times? In other words, it has only been roughly a month since our teacher arrived in the Azure. Zhao Yue remarked contemplatively. If that's the case, it's likely that our teacher hasn't recovered from his injuries yet. Perhaps he might even be in Zhenjiang City at this very moment. Chapter 2076 Zhenjiang River. They were well aware of their teacher's talents. If he had a year or so, he would have surely been able to recover from his injuries and perhaps, he might have even made a name for himself too. However, considering the severity of the injuries caused by passing through the spatial passageway, it really seemed improbable for him to be able to walk out of Zhenjiang City within just the passing of a single month. Furthermore, they were in a brand new world. Back at the master-teacher continent, ancient sage 4-dan cultivators were existences who could make the world tremble with a single word. But here, they were mere fishes in a massive ocean. Yuen, let me find someone to ask about that matter. With this thought in mind, Zhao Wei turned to the maid not too far away and asked, "May I trouble you to relay our wish to meet the old master? My juniors and I would like to express our gratitude to him." "Yes, young miss," the maid replied as she left the area. Not too long later, a middle-aged man walked in with widened strides, and upon seeing the group of 9, he remarked in astonishment, "You all have regained consciousness so quickly despite being so heavily injured." He didn't know much about medicine, but he had the physicians in the residence to specially take a look at them. Under normal circumstances, those who had sustained injuries to that extent would take at least several months before they could wake up. Yet, barely a few days had passed and they had all regained consciousness. It looked like there were more to them than he thought. Could it be that, just like Dan Xiaotian, his luck had arrived? "We are extremely grateful to you for saving our lives." The 9 of them stood up and clasped their fists together. "You're too polite, I'm just doing what any other person would have done," Zhong Yuanwei replied with a smile. After trading a few pleasantries, Zhao Wei got straight to the point. "Our memories are currently a little befuddled due to the injuries we have sustained, so may I ask which power does Shenjiang City fall under, and is there a master-teacher pavilion or anything similar here?" "Master-teacher pavilion?" Zhong Yuanwei blinked his eyes. "I'm afraid that I have never heard of something like that before." Then, he paused for a moment before replying to the first question. "Shenjiang City is under the jurisdiction of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, one of the 6 sects. "One of the 6 sects?" "Indeed. The Forsaken Continent is ruled by the 6 sects, and they are namely the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, Myriad Beasts Hall." Zhong Yuanwei began going into the details. The group of 9 widened their eyes in realization. It seemed like they had really arrived on the Azure. This was clearly a world completely different from that of the Master-Teacher continent. Speaking of the 6 sects, something shocking happened just a few days ago. As Zhong Yuanwei began on that topic, he couldn't help but recall the various exciting news he had heard recently, such that he was slowly getting more and more into the conversation. "Have you heard of the new hall master of the Myriad Beasts Hall, Zhengyang?" "Zhengyang?" The group was stunned for a moment. 8 of the 9 youths turned their gazes to the young man sitting amongst them. "He shares the same name as me?" Zhengyang scratched his head awkwardly. "Your name is Zhengyang as well?" Zhong Yuanwei was slightly surprised by the coincidence as well. A moment later, he burst into laughter and said, "There are plenty of people who share the same name in the world. This is not a cause for concern at all. Given the scale of the Forsaken Continent, there must be at least thousands of people who were known as Zhengyang here. I understand. It's just that I'm slightly surprised to hear that such a powerful expert would share my common name." Zhengyang replied. "Common? If you are talking about the most typical, run-of-the-mill name, there's probably no one who can compete with the new pavilion master of the 7-star pavilion," Zhong Yuanwei remarked with a smile. "Oh, a name that's even more common than Zhengyang? Just how horrible must it be for you to describe it as run-of-the-mill?" Liu Yang chirped in as he glanced at Zhengyang playfully. "Indeed. The pavilion master goes by the name of Liu Yang," Zhong Yuanwei said. Liu Yang. Seeing how the gazes of the youths had centered around the young man who had just spoken, Zhong Yuanwei realized that something was amiss with their expressions, so he asked, "What's wrong? Could it be that you don't find this name common and run-of-the-mill enough? If you were to ask me, I think Liu Yang sounds a lot more awful than Zhengyang. Do you all not agree?" "Ah, please don't misunderstand me. It's not that I'm trying to insult your name, Brother Zheng. It was just a passing thought." Liu Yang's face darkened as he said, "Well, I share the same name as the pavilion master. I am Liu Yang too." Zhong Yuanwei was stunned. Did he just pick up a den of sect leader impersonators? He looked at the 9 youths before him and hesitated for a moment before asking carefully, "Then, by any chance, are any one of you called Zhongxian?" "You know Zhongxian?" Zhao Wei was stunned. "Indeed. There's no one on the Forsaken Continent who wouldn't have heard of this name," Zhong Yuanwei replied as a matter-of-factly. "He's the sect leader of our Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion." "The sect leader of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion?" Zhong Yuanwei was taken aback by what he had just heard. "Pardon me, But may I trouble you to bring us over to the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion? Zhao Wei asked. The group of 9 asked a few more questions after that, and it didn't take long before they were confident that the so-called sect leader Zhong was indeed their teacher. That's easy. I'll have it done right away, Zhong Yuanwei replied before rushing out of the room. He did harbor some doubts about the story of the 9 youths, but if, by any chance, what they said turned out to be true, and that they were really sect leader Zhong's direct disciples, as their savior, he would surely be handsomely rewarded for his deed. At the top of a mountain in the vicinity of Zhenjiang City, Zhong Xian and Wu Chen waited for an hour before the red string on the halberd began floating up. It was pointing toward a certain direction. Zhong Xian immediately rose to his feet. The direction which the red string was pointing toward was where, surprisingly, Zhenjiang River located. It's no wonder I was unable to find the entrance. Zhong Xian had asked Dan Xiaotian where the latter had found him, and he had made sure to examine the place earlier after he arrived at Zhenjiang City. However, he was unable to find anything there at all. In the end, it turned out that the entrance of that spatial passageway was actually in Zhenjiang River. The flow of water would mask the pulsations of spiritual energy that usually came from a formation. Considering the vastness of the river, if a formation was set up within it, it would indeed be difficult for even the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion to notice it. Zhong Xian quickly kept his formation flags and the halberd back to his storage ring before heading to the area where the red string was pointing toward. Without any hesitation, he leaped into the river and swam downward. Zhenjiang River was rather deep. Its seabed was roughly 100 meters below water level. Nevertheless, it didn't take long for Zhong Xian to reach the bottom. However, a frown soon formed on his forehead. Based on his observation, everything within a diameter of several hundred li of him appeared to be perfectly normal. He couldn't sense any anomalies at all. Young master. Wu Chen was unable to find anything as well, so he turned his head over to look at Zhong Xian questioningly. Did something go wrong with the formation earlier, leading them to the wrong place? Hold on for a moment, Zhong Xian said. He pricked his finger with a tiny surge of sword qi and flicked out a droplet of his blood. Wang. With a resounding buzz, the silt that was deposited at the bottom of the seabed immediately rose up, revealing a stone door beneath. Zhong Xian walked over and pushed on it gently. The stone door opened with a bit of resistance, revealing a dark passageway. Zhong Xian was about to walk in when he saw Wu Chen looking at the stone door with a look of incomprehension on his face. With a light chuckle, he explained, "This passageway was sealed by Kongsha back then in order to prevent the mercury-like spiritual energy for the azure from leaking over. My bloodline is different from that of Kongsha, but as fellow celestial master teachers, our powers still resonate to a degree with one another. Through my bloodline, I was able to activate the hidden formation. Otherwise, there's no way we would have been able to find it. In fact, the resonance wasn't just because they were celestial master teachers. More importantly, both of them carried fragments of the heavens within them. It was just that Zhong Xian didn't feel like sharing it with others. On the other hand, Wu Chen widened his eyes in realization. Heading down the passageway, it didn't take long for Zhong Xian to arrive at a spacious hall. There were 8 ancient sage 4 Dan guards in the hall, and they were currently drinking with one another. What's the difference between imprisonment and guarding this area? It's too boring. Buoying. I heard that those living in the world on the other side are extremely weak. They are weak, but the entrance is completely sealed. There's no way we can head down there. The 8 guards muttered as they gulped down their wine. They must be the guards Kongsha has dispatched to guard the passageway, Zhong Xian thought as he listened to their conversation. He waved his hands lightly, and before the guards could even react, they had already turned into dust. They were only guarding this area under Kongsha's commands, but them lingering in this area would pose a huge threat to the 100 schools of philosophers and the master-teacher continent. Out of safety concerns, he had no choice but to get rid of them. With his current strength, he could easily completely vanquish a person's existence from the face of the world. At the very center of the hall was a massive spiral. Surges of mercury-like spiritual energy were drawn into the spiral, disappearing into an unknown land. The 2 doors by the sides of the spiral were inscribed with some sort of bizarre patterns. Taking a closer look, The patterns were rather similar to that of the Starchaser Palace's altar. It seems like Kongsha was worried that someone would blockade the entrance, so he designed the formation to be so that anyone traveling to the Azure from the Master Teacher continent would be teleported straight to a random place near Shenjiang City. Zhongxian stroked his lower jaw contemplatively. Chapter 2077. Returning to the Master Teacher continent. Due to these inscriptions, even though these gates looked like a door, if someone were to really pass through the spatial passageway, he would be silently transported to a random place around Shenjiang City. Otherwise, given how he had been unconscious when he passed through the spatial passageway back then, there was no way he would have survived after being caught by this group of people. This place can only be activated with Kong Shi's and my bloodline, such that even semi-divinity realm cultivators wouldn't be able to find it either way. Yet, he still dispatched his subordinates here. Just who is he trying to guard against? Zhongxian was getting a little confused. The secrecy of the spatial passageway was definitely top-notch, even by the Azure standard. It was likely that Kongsha had designed it specifically in order to make sure that no one from the Azure would be able to find it. Even if someone were to find it, they would be unable to harm those coming over from the Master Teacher continent. Thus, it was contradictory for Kongsha to instruct his subordinates to guard the spatial passageway. It was as if he was trying to eliminate anyone coming over from the Master Teacher continent. If that was really true, wouldn't that also mean that he was unable to read the inscriptions and didn't know that those who entered the spatial passageway would be randomly teleported away? It is very likely for what Vicious said to be true. That man is likely to be a fake Kongsha. Previously, he still harbored some reservations when he heard those words from Vicious, but at this moment, he was starting to see some sense to it. If the Kongsha he had faced was real, there was no way the other party wouldn't know about the various mechanisms he had installed in place unless the other party lost his memory one way or another, just like a certain little yellow chick. Thinking about the little yellow chick, a sigh escaped from Zhongxian's lips. He had fed the unique aura of the Azure Bridge to the little yellow chick, but for some reason, the latter was unable to achieve a breakthrough to semi-divinity realm. He had tried all kinds of means to further its cultivation, but nothing worked at all. He was really unable to comprehend just what were the criteria required for it to make a breakthrough. Shaking his head, Zhongxian moved forward to check the condition of the spatial passageway. Seeing that it was still working fine, he took out the disguise amulet and used it to suppress his cultivation. At the same time, he turned to Wu Chen and said, "Let's suppress our cultivation down to Ancient Sage 4 Dan before entering the spatial passageway." Ancient Sage 4 Dan was the limit of what the Master Teacher continent could withstand. If it had been any other semi-divinity or high immortal, even if they were to suppress their cultivation, they would still be rejected by the world if they attempted to descend to Master Teacher continent. On the other hand, Zhongxian had the disguise amulet whereas Wu Chen had the disguise method imparted to him from Luo Ruoxin. Using these to conceal their cultivation, they would be able to fool even the heavens of the Master Teacher continent. After all, Luo Ruoxin also used the same method to enter the Master Teacher continent back then. It was only because she revealed her true strength during the fight for the Great Codex of Spring and Autumn that she was eventually rejected by the heavens and was forced to leave the Master Teacher continent. Entering the spatial passageway, Zhongxian saw the chaotic spatial currents raging in the surroundings. All kinds of spatial turbulence flew in his direction, threatening to slice him apart. Any other Ancient Sage 4 Dan in his place would have likely lost consciousness before long. However, both Wu Chen and Zhongxian were top-notch experts of the Azure. Even if they were to compress their cultivation, they still had their powerful soul energy and physical body to protect them. As a result, the spatial turbulence striking on them dealt no damage at all. At the same time, their speed was also much faster than before. Previously, Zhongxian took half a month before he finally reached the other end of the spatial passageway, but this time around, he could also see the exit when he had only been traveling for less than 2 hours. A massive coffin was floating peacefully in the air, sealing the space around the exit. It had fused as one entity with the exit, sealing it off entirely. Zhongxian placed his finger lightly on it, and the formation immediately unraveled. He leisurely passed through the exit together with Wu Chen. The glaring rays of the sun shone on his face. The familiar scent of the master-teacher continent tingled his nose. He had returned. Zhongshe. Barely after Zhongxian landed on the ground, he heard a shout coming from not too far away. Shortly after, ancient sage Yang Qing appeared before him. Over a year of absence, the latter had managed to advance his cultivation significantly. At the same time, he didn't look as feeble as before anymore. Yuan. Zhongxian nodded in acknowledgement. He turned his gaze to the side and saw someone standing before an altar, chanting endlessly. A furious flame was blazing atop the altar, emanating a sinister glow. This was the ritual that had guided their way back to the master-teacher continent. However, the person conducting the ritual was an unfamiliar face. Who is he? Where's Liu Yang? Zhongxian asked with a frown. Wasn't the current sovereign Chen Yong his direct disciple, Liu Yang? Why would the one conducting the ritual be an otherworldly demon whom he didn't recognize instead? This person over here is the new sovereign of the otherworldly demonic tribe, Chen Xiao. His Liu Yang's direct disciple, ancient sage Yang Qing replied. Liu Yang's direct disciple? So, he's my grand student. Zhongxian was slightly taken aback. It felt weird for him to have a grand student when he was only in his early 20s. That's right, ancient sage Yang Qing nodded. If he has become the sovereign of the otherworldly demon, then where is Liu Yang? Where are Kong Shiyao, Zhao Ya, and the others? Zhongxian asked doubtfully. He had told First Elder Zhao Yu to send a message down to the incumbent sovereign Chen Yong to hold the ritual. Even though he didn't explicitly state that he was planning to descend to Master-Teacher Continent, it was still very likely that Liu Yang and the others would be interested to watch the proceedings of the ritual to the Azure. Zhongshe, your 9 direct disciples have entered the Azure through the passageway you took 3 months ago. Ancient sage Yang Qing replied. They went to the Azure too? Zhongxian was stunned. If they entered the Azure 3 months ago, that would equate to roughly 9 days in the Azure. Back then, he was at the Ocean of Exiled Stars teaching Elder Hongwu and the others. I'll have to look for them after I return to the Azure. Zhongxian remarked with a deep sigh. Considering how they had left some time ago and that he didn't encounter them in the spatial passageway, it was very likely that they were already at Zhenjiang City. So, he decided not to think too much into the matter. Just as he was about to continue speaking, he suddenly spotted 2 silhouettes flying over hurriedly from the horizon. They were his parents, the Xingmeng Sword Saints. Xian'er. Sword Saint Meng called out in agitation. Seeing that her son was fine, her eyes reddened slightly as she breathed out deeply. I'm glad that you are fine. The Azure was fraught with dangers. Ever since her son left for that place, there had never been a single day that she didn't worry for him. There was completely no news from him at all, and this had been weighing on her mind over the past year. It was only after seeing that Zhongxian was fine was she able to heave a sigh of relief. Seeing the Xingmeng Sword Saints, Zhongxian smiled gently and said, Mother and Father, I'm fine. His parents had managed to make significant breakthrough in their cultivation during his absence. They, too, had managed to reach ancient sage Fo Dan. Zhongxian inquired about the current situation on the Master-Teacher Continent. The Master-Teacher Continent had been developing well, and the reforms Yangshe pushed for were being implemented well. As for the otherworldly demonic tribe, there hadn't been any problem ever since Liu Yang took over as the next sovereign Chen Yong. There was still some tension, but the situation was peaceful. The 100 schools of philosophers had managed to lower the concentration of the Mercury-like spiritual energy to a level where even human cultivators could absorb them without too much problem. At this rate, the chances of a war happening would keep lowering. Heading to the main hall where the 100 schools of philosophers host its guests, Zhongxian saw a bunch of familiar faces, the head of the Luo clan, the head of the Jiang clan, Master Teacher Pavilions Yang Xian. Just like the Xingmeng Sword Saints, their cultivation had reached ancient sage Fo Dan. If those warriors blocking the spatial passageway were to attempt to invade the Master Teacher Pavilion once more, it was likely that they would simply get killed on the spot. They began chatting with one another to catch up with one another. Halfway through the conversation, Luo Xianqing suddenly looked at him worriedly and asked, Zhongxian, did you see my younger sister while you were in the Azure? Your young sister? Zhongxian was taken aback. Isn't Chichi on the master-teacher continent? He had left alone back then, and it was certain that he hadn't seen Luo Chichi anywhere on the Azure either. A year ago, shortly after you left for the Azure, she said that she'll head there as well to look for you. Luo Shenqing shook his head and sighed. Look for me. Did she enter the Azure through the spatial passageway as well? Zhong Xian asked with a frown. That's not it. She used the dimension silencer to break open the dimension barrier of the master-teacher continent, Luo Shenqing replied. Zhong Xian was stunned. With his current cultivation, he would be able to break open the dimension barrier as well. He was no longer that reliant on the spatial passageway to return back to the Azure anymore. However, the Luo Chichi from a year ago, no matter how powerful she could have been, at the very most, she could only have been at ancient sage 4 Dan. How did she manage to break open the dimension barrier of the master-teacher continent? Do you know why she called herself Chichi? Luo Shenqing suddenly asked this question. He knew that there was already a massive gap between the two of them, so his desire to compete with the young man standing before him had already died down. All he hoped was for the young man to find his younger sister and take care of her. Isn't the reason why she called herself Chichi because she has 6 older brothers in front of her? Zhong Xian seemed to have recalled something like that before. Indeed. She has 6 elder brothers in front of her. I am in the 6th place in terms of seniority, and my 5 elder brothers have all passed away. Given that the Luo clan's standing and power on the master-teacher continent, don't you think that it's weird that all 5 of my elder brothers have passed away prematurely? Luo Shenqing asked. Zhong Xian was stunned. He had indeed been a little curious about it back then, but he chose not to probe too deeply into the matter. Given the Luo clan standing on the master-teacher continent, even if the otherworldly demonic tribe were to launch an assault, there was no way they would have been able to kill all 5 sons of the esteemed clan head so easily. It's because of the dimension silencer, Luo Shenqing suddenly said. It's an artifact that our predecessor acquired, and it harnesses an unbelievable amount of power within it. You should have heard about how my younger sister was able to assimilate it shortly after her birth because of the sheer purity of her bloodline. That isn't entirely true. More than that, it's because of my 5 elder brothers that she was able to do so. Back then, something triggered the dimension silencer, and it was on the verge of tearing open the dimension barrier and escaping. If that were to happen, the Luo clan would slip from the position of the 3 premier sage clans. In order to prevent the decline of the family, my 5 elder brothers sacrificed themselves and fed the dimension silencer with their blood essence before the latter finally calmed down. As a result of that, the spirit within the dimension silencer also slowly began awakening, and she eventually became the Chichi you know of. Wait a moment, you are saying that Chichi is actually the weapon spirit of the dimension silencer? Zhong Xian narrowed his eyes in shock. The spirit slipped into my mother's womb, and my mother eventually gave birth to Chichi. She is the spirit of the dimension silencer, but at the same time, there's no doubt that she's my younger sister as well. After all, her flesh and blood originate from our Luo clan, Luo Shenqing said. Zhong Xian nodded slowly. He had seen many different kinds of weapon spirits, and he had tamed many of them before. However, none of the spirits were able to leave the confines of their main body, and that applied to even semi-divinity artifacts too. Thus, it was inconceivable that the spirit of the dimension silencer was able to leave its body and reincarnate as a human. How did she tear apart the dimension barrier? How did you know that she was heading to the Azure? Zhong Xian continued asking. Shortly after you left, her will to follow you to the Azure grew stronger and stronger. In resonance with her emotions, the dimension silencer emanated overwhelming energy that allowed her to overcome the limitations of ancient sage 4 Dan. She reached an unfathomable level, which resulted in her being rejected by the heavens of the master-teacher continent. Eventually, she was squeezed out of the world together with the dimension silencer, Luo Shenqing said. The experts of our Luo clan did everything that we could, but we weren't able to stop her from leaving. Zhong Xian fell silent. That was also rather similar to how Luo Ruoxin left back then. They were squeezed out by the space of the master-teacher continent, a bit similar to a wooden log in the face of water. No matter how hard one pressed the wooden log down into the water, the moment the force was released, it would simply float back to the surface of the water. Given the situation, it was very likely that Luo Chichi had been forced into the azure. Alright, I'll take a look around when I return to the azure later on. If I were to find her, I'll relay the news to the sovereign of the otherworldly demonic tribe, Zhong Xian said. Chapter 2078 Fraudsters. Zhong Xian made sure to jot the matter concerning Luo Chichi in his mind. The Forsaken Continent was massive, but as the head of 4 sects, it still shouldn't be too difficult for him to uncover the whereabouts of an individual. After parting from Luo Shenqing, Zhong Xian chatted a while with Yang Shi and the others to catch up with time before imparting to them the cultivation techniques and battle techniques he had newly compiled so that the Master Teacher Pavilion could share the knowledge with the world. Just like that, a day passed in a flash. The main reason why I returned this time around is to borrow the altar. There are still a lot of things I have to deal with back at the Azure, so I won't be staying here. Zhong Xian knew that he was tight on time. So, after he received the altar, he called Wu Chen over. He was intending to break open the dimension barrier directly and return back to the Azure right away. At this moment, though, a voice suddenly cried out. "Young master, bring me with you." Sun Qiong rushed forward as he looked at Zhong Xian with pleading eyes. Shortly after Zhong Xian left, he swiftly realized that his indolence was going to cost him the opportunity to rise to higher grounds. He was made aware of the painful fact that he was no longer able to keep up with Zhong Xian anymore. Thus, over the past year, he trained desperately. In view that he used to be Zhong Xian's butler, the Master Teacher Pavilion and the Zhong clan also provided him with ample resources for his cultivation. Just like that, he actually managed to reach Ancient Sage 4 Dan primary stage as well, just like the rest. "You wish to head to the Azure as well?" Zhong Xian asked with a questioning frown. "Yes, I wish to follow you," Sun Qiong replied in determination. He was aware of the fact that he was materialistic, and he enjoyed exploiting his influence and reputation as Zhong Xian's butler and an ancient sage. The respect and admiration that others showered him with swelled him up with pride. But for some reason, he felt as if something was missing, leaving him with an odd feeling of emptiness inside. Those should have been the things that he desired all his life. But now that he had acquired it all, he found himself reminiscing about the old days. Remembering those exciting days where he confidently berated experts far beyond his league made his heart thump with excitement. He realized that those were actually the golden days of his life, and he missed them dearly so. He didn't want to limit himself to a boring life in this small world. He wanted to follow the young master. He knew that only then would he be able to experience the vibrant life he had before. "We are intending to break open the dimension barrier directly to enter the Azure. It's too dangerous for you at the moment, and I don't have the confidence that I'll be able to protect you like this. However, if you really wish to follow me, you can enter the Azure through the spatial passageway. Here are some medicine. Swallow them before you enter the spatial passageway. They should heal your injuries and prevent you from losing consciousness." With a flick of his wrist, Zhong Xian took out a bottle of chicken soup and a protective artifact before passing them over to Sun Qiong. Then, he looked at Sun Qiong and said, "After you arrive at the Azure, head to the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion and report my name. Someone will bring you to me." The pressure of passing through the dimension barrier directly was extremely great, such that it was unlikely for even an ancient sage 4 Dan cultivator to survive the journey. Sun Qiong nodded his head in agitation. After dealing with everything that he had to, Zhong Xian unhesitatingly released the seal on his cultivation, causing a resounding echo in the air. Following that, he felt the entire world rejecting his existence. An unknown force was trying to push him out of the world. Who? Zhong Xian allowed the force to push him out without resisting. In a few moments, he was already out of the Master Teacher Continent's dimension barrier. However, the danger wasn't over yet. Amidst the space in between the two worlds, Zhong Xian could see spatial turbulence raging in his direction, threatening to rip him apart. He quickly drove his Zhunqi to form a protective barrier around him so as to ward off the spatial turbulence. At the same time, he allowed the force of rejection from the Master Teacher Continent to continue propel him forward. Soon enough, light returned to his sight. With a slight shake, He was squeezed out of the void and landed in the air right after Shenjiang City. We were indeed able to return easily, Zhongxian remarked with a light chuckle. He turned to look at Wu Chen, and the latter seemed to be a little surprised by the matter as well. From the looks of it, it seemed that even though moving from a stronger world to a weaker world was extremely difficult, returning back to a stronger world from a weaker world was much easier in comparison. They had to rely on Luo Ruoxin's disguise amulet and disguise art in order for them to conceal themselves from the heavens of the master-teacher continent. Otherwise, if they were to just suppress their cultivation, there was no way they could have fooled the heavens of the master-teacher continent. They would have likely been pushed out before they could even enter the world. Let me first take a look around to see if Zhao Ya and the others are still around, Zhongxian said as he extended his consciousness all around Shenjiang City. At his level of cultivation, as long as he willed so, he could even sense the slightest flutter of one's eyelashes all over Shenjiang City. They are there. A moment later, Zhongxian's eyes lit up. He was worried that his direct disciples would have already left Shenjiang City given that it had been 9 days since they arrived. He was glad to see that they were still around. However, he also realized that the residence they were in was preparing aerial beasts. It looked like they were preparing to set off. So, Zhongxian quickly headed over without any hesitation. Zhong Yuanwei, why are you in such a hurry to borrow my aerial beasts? Is there something that you need to do? A pot-bellied middle-aged man walked over and looked at Zhong Yuanwei doubtfully. There weren't too many clans in Shenjiang City who had the power and wealth to rear aerial beasts, but the middle-aged man, Wu Jiangcheng, happened to be one of them. After the downfall of the Shui clan, the aerial beasts of his clan became the strongest and fastest ones of the entire city. It was for this reason that Zhong Yuanwei paid a visit to him in hopes of borrowing his aerial beast. Do you remember the group of youths whom I have saved? Zhong Yuanwei asked with a smile. I remember that. Are you going to try your luck just like Dan Xiaotian? Wu Jiangcheng asked with a chortle. Dan Xiaotian's encounter was one of kind. No one could hope to emulate what he had done. After all, there could only be a single sect leader Zhongxian in the world. Surely someone like Zhong Yuanwei wouldn't be so naive as to think that he would strike gold just by saving a couple of people off the streets. How could something that good happen so easily? If that was the case, he wouldn't bother doing anything anymore. He would simply devote his time to saving people out there. To be honest with you, I think that Lady Luck really shone on me this time around. Zhong Yuanwei replied with a mysterious smile on his lips. He was on good terms with Wu Jiangcheng, so he had no intentions of hiding the matter from the other party. Is it? Wu Jiangcheng was slightly surprised to hear those words from Zhong Yuanwei. Don't tell me that you have saved a sect leader or an elder. Even if you want to joke with me, there should be a limit to it. There can't be that many sect leaders or elders who are in a dire situation in the world. Haha, of course not. You are thinking too much into it. Zhong Yuanwei looked around him warily before leaning closer toward Wu Jiangcheng. I'll only be telling you this. The 9 people whom I have saved are actually the direct disciples of sect leader Zhongxian. The direct disciples of sect leader Zhongxian? Ha ha ha. You really are good at kidding around. Wu Jiangcheng burst out laughing. Sect leader Zhongxian is the head of 4 sects, the strongest man in the world. There are countless people in the world who desire to come under this tutelage. Just walk around the streets and you will easily find a handful of people who want to become his student, and some might even go to the extent of proclaiming that they had learned something from him before. Are you sure you want to take those words for real? Just a few days ago, I caught a horse from the wilderness, and that fellow actually used his hooves to write out that he's a student of sect leader Zhongxian. Even a horse is doing that too? Zhong Yuanwei was stunned. Indeed. It's not that I want to shatter your dreams, but you really shouldn't pin your hopes on this. It's almost guaranteed that those youths you have captured are trying to scam your money, and only a fool like you will fall for their tricks. Wu Jiangcheng harumphed. Just think about it. As the head of 4 sects, who would dare to offend Zhongxian's direct disciples and injure them? And how could it be so coincidental that all of them would be saved by you as well? It's obviously a planned scheme. Zhong Yuanwei was rendered speechless. There was so much sense to what Wu Jiangcheng was saying that he had no idea how to refute the other party's words. Thinking back, the only evidence he had regarding their claim that they were Zhongxian's disciples came from their words, and it was too easy to spout falsehoods from one's mouth. Could he have really been scammed? Ayo, let's head over to meet them together. I'll expose the true faces of those liars for you. Seeing the conflicted look on his good friend's face, Wu Jiangcheng tucked in his tummy, though it didn't make much of a difference, and spoke vehemently. I'll be troubling brother Wu then. Zhong Yuanwei heaved a sigh of relief. He quickly led the way to the courtyard where Zhao Yue and the others were residing in. You are the ones who claim to be sect leader Zhongxian's direct disciples? Upon arriving in the courtyard and seeing a bunch of feeble-bodied young men, Wu Jiangcheng was even more convinced of his thoughts, and he sneered coldly. On the other hand, Zhao Yue and the others swiftly sensed Wu Jiangcheng's hostility, and a slight frown appeared on their faces. Every single one of them were existences who could make the master-teacher continent tremble with a stomp of their foot. As such, they were displeased to see someone acting so disrespectful to them when it was only their first meeting. Why aren't you saying anything? Wu Jiangcheng looked at the frowns on their faces and scoffed. Do you know what's the crime for impersonating sect leader Zhongxian's direct disciples? Putting aside heading to the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, if I were to just report you to the City Lord right away, the 9 of you will be immediately thrown to the jail. Those words caused the hot-tempered Yuan Dao to take a step furiously. The others were also glaring at Wu Jiangcheng coldly, as if they were going to pummel his head into the ground. Afraid that they would really come to blows, Kong Xiao stood forward and clasped her fist. We aren't impersonators. Zhongxian is indeed our teacher. Who doesn't know how to spout a couple of words from their mouths? Do you have any evidence to prove the matter? Wu Jiangcheng sneered. Kong Xiao fell silent. It was impossible to bring their storage rings or anything else with them through the spatial passageway, so they had nothing that could prove their identity with them at the moment. Furthermore, even if they could bring it out, there was no way the other party would be able to recognize it either way. Did Cat get your tongue? Why aren't any of you talking anymore? With a grand wave of his hand, Wu Jiangcheng's voice suddenly became much louder and sharper. How dare you try to impersonate sect leader Zhongxian's direct disciples? Just what gave you the audacity to do something as ridiculous as this? We really are Zhongxian's direct disciples. Kong Xiao frowned in displeasure. Enough. I'm not like Zhong Yuanwei, who would easily fall for your lies. If you are really sect leader Zhongxian's direct disciples, I would be his teacher then. Men. Wu Jiangcheng harumphed coldly. With a raise of his hand, he beckoned for his subordinates to capture these fraudsters and bring them over to the City Lord Manor. But at this moment, a faint voice echoed in the air. You said that you are my teacher. Why don't I know about it? Who is it? Taken aback, Wu Jiangcheng quickly raised his head, only to see 2 figures floating quietly in the air. One of them was gazing downward with a faint smile on his lips. Sect leader Zhongxian. Wu Jiangcheng's body stiffened up on the spot. His knees knocked together from fear, and he nearly fainted on the spot. He watched Dan Xiaotian's court proceedings at the City Lord Manor back then, and there, he had the honor to meet sect leader Zhongxian in person. The person above him shared the same appearance as sect leader Zhongxian, and the very fact that he was flying in the sky meant that he was at least a high immortal. If so, there wasn't much to be said about the other party's identity. Teacher. Contrary to Wu Jiangcheng's shock, upon seeing the figure in the sky, the eyes of Zhao Yue and the others reddened, and they quickly kneeled onto the ground. Yuan, it has been hard on you all. Seeing how far his direct disciples had grown in his absence, Zhongxian nodded in satisfaction. With a wave of his hand, he passed 9 jade bottles to them. Drink it. Yes, teacher. The 9 of them gulped down the chicken soup inside the bottles, and in the next moment, they felt incredible energy washing through their meridians. In just a few moments, their injuries had already vanished. They are all ancient sage 4-dan cultivators. Wu Jiangcheng and Zhong Yuanwei nearly passed out from shock. This was especially so for Wu Jiangcheng. He really wanted to burst into tears at this very moment. Even the City Lord, the most powerful man in Shenjiang City, was an ancient sage 4-dan cultivator. Yet, these young men and women had actually reached that level as well. It was fortunate the sect leader Zhong came in time. Otherwise, given what he had just said, these 9 youths would have surely wrangled his neck out of rage. Chapter 2079 Zhongxian creates a cultivation technique. Zhongxian looked at his direct disciples intently. It was only a month for him, but it had been more than a year for them. He could see hints of maturity and determination on their youthful faces. At the same time, they had also advanced their cultivation significantly too. They hadn't let him down on his teachings. Let's go. With a wave of his hand, all 9 of them flew into the air simultaneously. Zhongxian touched his tamed beast sack with his finger lightly, and the serpentine dragon materialized in the air. It grew along with a powerful gale, and in the blink of an eye, it was already more than 100 meters long. Zhongxian and his disciples quickly got on top of it. A pseudo-dragon? Such a life form actually exists in the world. Innumerable people of Shenjiang City saw the appearance of the dragon. From the initial shock, they quickly kneeled onto the ground one after another, not daring to raise their heads. Pseudo-dragons had only appeared once in the history of the Forsaken Continent. It was expected that it would cause such a huge impact when it appeared once more. Pseudo-dragon. Wu Jiangcheng felt even more like crying. The appearance of this being reinforced the fact that it was indeed the most powerful man of the Forsaken Continent right in front of him. He actually had the guts to question the other party's direct disciples, not to mention, he even audaciously claimed that he was the other party's teacher. At this rate, he really should just find a brick and knock himself out with it. Wu Jiangcheng trembled in fright, fearing that sect leader Zhongxian would harbor a grudge against him for his insolent behavior earlier. At this moment, the voice in the air sounded once more, Zhong Yuanwei, you have my gratitude for saving my 9 direct disciples. As long as your descendants arrive at the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion with this token in hand, you can be assured that they would be entitled to the top resources of our sect. A token fell from the air and landed quietly atop Zhong Yuanwei's palm. Thank you, sect leader Zhong. Zhong Yuanwei bowed deeply in gratitude. This token was pretty much a token of invulnerability in Shenjiang City. No power or clan would dare to provoke him. At the same time, once he sent the descendant he had chosen to the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion with the token, it was guaranteed that his clan would rise to greatness. Understanding the deep significance behind the token, Zhong Yuanwei clutched onto it tightly with his fingers as he raised his head. However, he found that there was nothing in the sky anymore. The pseudo-dragon had disappeared along with the others. Kindness goes around in a circle. I must do more good deeds and generate more positivity in the world, Zhong Yuanwei thought as he kneeled onto the floor and kowtowed deeply. It was true that he had saved those 9 with ulterior motives in mind, but to be honest, he didn't expect to be repaid like this. After all, even he knew that the chances of what that had happened to Dan Xiaotian happening to him were extremely slim. Yet, it still happened in the end. He didn't think that he would be rewarded in such a manner. Brother Zhong, you have really changed your fate. Everything will be different from today onward, Wu Jiangcheng remarked in envy as he looked at his food friend. Just the favor of having saved sect leader Zhong's direct disciples was enough to pave his way to greatness. My luck was really good. However, I think what's more important is for us to view the world as kindness and do more good deeds, Zhong Yuanwei smiled. To celebrate his fortuitous encounter, Zhong Yuanwei hosted a banquet that night, and of course, Wu Jiangcheng joined in the festivities as well. But as he returned home from the night banquet, he couldn't help but sigh deeply. It feels like I have gotten too caught up with vying for power and wealth in this world that I started viewing the world with skepticism. I forgot about the core that makes me human. Wu Jiangcheng remarked with a bitter smile. He couldn't help but recall how his first response after hearing Zhong Yuanwei's words was utter skepticism. He didn't think that his skepticism was unjustified, but it felt like he had lost the trust for the world that he did in the past. Perhaps, it was time for him to make a change. Putong. While he was deep in thoughts, a dull thud echoed in the bushes not too far away. Alarmed, Wu Jiangcheng turned his head over and saw a fatty lying on the ground. The fatty's head was filled with dry grass. That friend over there, are you fine? Wu Jiangcheng quickly rushed over to help the fatty. On the other hand, the fatty rubbed the back of his head and he leaped to his feet. With a hint of wonderment on his face, he asked, "Is this the Azure?" Azure. Wu Jiangcheng blinked his eyes blankly. "Since you are from the Azure, have you ever heard of the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion?" the fatty asked. "I have heard of it," Wu Jiangcheng nodded in a daze, unsure of what the fatty was getting at. "Wonderful. Our young master is currently serving as the sect leader there. I need you to bring me over to the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion. As long as I can find our young master, you can be assured that you'll be handsomely rewarded for your service." The fatty patted off the dust from his robe as he looked at Wu Jiangcheng with his head tilted upward. "Your young master is serving as the sect leader. Could it be that?" Wu Jiangcheng's pupils dilated to round circles. "Are you related to sect leader Zhongxian?" "That's right. I am sect leader Zhong's butler," the fatty replied proudly. This fatty was Sun Qiong, who had entered the Azure through the spatial passageway. He had taken some time to pass through the spatial passageway, but due to the time difference, it had only been several hours on the Azure. As he had consumed the chicken soup Zhongxian had given to him, he managed to overcome the spatial turbulence without any trouble. With his ancient Sage 4 Dan cultivation perfectly intact, he would definitely be considered as a powerhouse in Shenjiang City. "You are sect leader Zhong's butler?" Wu Jiangcheng was still unable to come to terms with the current situation. "That doesn't seem right. I have heard of sect leader Zhong's butler, and he is an ex-bandit named Cao Chengli. I don't recall Cao Chengli being such a plump individual." "Cao Chengli?" It looked as if Sun Qiong's world had suddenly collapsed. With a pained expression on his face, he clutched his chest and exclaimed to the sky, "Young master, it has only been a single month and you have already replaced me with someone new. I, Sun Qiong, will not accept this. Where the heck is that Cao Chengli? I'll go castrate him this instant." Wu Jiangcheng. While Sun Qiong was raging at the fact that someone had replaced his role, Zhongxian and his direct disciples had just arrived at the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion. "Teacher." Dan Xiaotian rushed forward to greet Zhongxian. "Yuan. These are your seniors over here." Zhongxian looked at Dan Xiaotian and gestured. After that, he turned to Zhao Ya and the others and said, "This young lad over here is a disciple whom I have taken in here, Dan Xiaotian. Junior, you have our deepest gratitude for having saved our teacher." Along the way, Zhao Ya and the others had heard about their teacher's happenings after he had arrived at the Azure. If not for Dan Xiaotian saving their teacher at the very start, it was hard to tell how their teacher would have been right now. So, the 9 of them bowed deeply to Dan Xiaotian in order to express their gratitude. "Seniors, there's no need for this. Please, you are too polite." Astonished, Dan Xiaotian quickly bowed again and again in a fluster to the seniors as well. "Here are some superior immortal pills and cultivation technique manuals. I have designed the cultivation techniques specifically to suit each of your constitutions. Cultivate them and aim to reach high immortal as soon as possible so that you can lend me a hand too," Zhongxian said as he took out a couple of pills and jade tokens. Given his current identity, he had no lack of cultivation resources at the moment anymore. If he willed so, he could easily gather hundreds of superior immortal pills. After receiving their teacher's bestowment, the crowd quickly left for their own accommodations so that they could start cultivating. Zhao Ya and the others possessed great potential, and that allowed them to advance their cultivation swiftly as well. Soon after, Bai Wanqing returned back to the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion as well. She had been out on a mission together with her grandfather earlier. At this very moment, her cultivation had already reached Heavenly True Immortal Realm. She was only a step away from reaching High Immortal Realm. Zhongxian imparted his modified High Immortal Realm cultivation technique to her and instructed her to raise her cultivation swiftly. After dealing with the affairs concerning his students, Zhongxian was in no hurry to leave with Wu Chen. Instead, he looked for a silent chamber and began cultivating. He had managed to acquire the otherworldly demonic tribe's altar, which meant that he could conduct a ritual and teleport over to where the Starchaser Palace's altar was. However, he didn't think that the timing was right yet. Putting aside Kongshe, The Hall of Gods had plenty of experts in their ranks. Furthermore, they were bound to have some trump cards at their home ground too. If he wanted to save Du Qingyuan and solve all trouble, he would definitely have to raise his cultivation to semi-divinity realm at the very least. Only then would he be able to fight on equal grounds with Kongshe and save Du Qingyuan. However, he didn't have a proper cultivation technique for that yet. He would have to forge his own path if he wanted to reach greater heights in the future. It was just that creating one's own path was no easy feat. Zhongxian had already immersed his consciousness in the great codex of spring and autumn for many days so far, but he still had no directions as to where he should focus on at all. Sighing deeply, Zhongxian brought his consciousness into the great codex of spring and autumn as well, and he began contemplating over all of the insights he had received over the last few days. Slowly, he got into a state of deep concentration. As someone who has cultivated the heavens path divine art, my body won't be able to practice cultivation techniques that are too inferior. Putting aside whether an inferior cultivation technique would be able to spur the growth of his exceptionally powerful cultivation and body, even if it was able to, it wouldn't raise his fighting prowess by too much. Thus, I can't compromise too much. Even if the cultivation technique I have created won't be able to reach the level of Heaven's Path divine art, it must at least be close to that level. This was also Zhongxian's bottom line as well. If he was going to do it, he was determined to do it to the best of his abilities so that he wouldn't have any regrets in the future. Kongshe said that he has comprehended the heaven's order, whereas I have comprehended the heaven's imperfections. The more often I use my library of Heaven's Path, the more reliant I would be on it. Eventually, I would be assimilated by the heavens. Zhongxian pondered. Granted that those words were spoken by the enemy, even after he pondered over the matter, he still thought that there was a high possibility that it was the truth. Similar to the celestial master teacher, the power of the heavens definitely granted him incredible growth. However, if he wanted to surpass the heavens, he would have to eventually sever his connection with it. Otherwise, his reliance on the heavens would eventually cap his growth, causing him to eventually stagnate. Heaven's order and heaven's imperfections, I wonder what else there are. As thoughts filled Zhongxian's mind, he gradually lost track of time. Regardless of whether he was reliant on the Heaven's Path divine art or not, it was a fact that it would become more and more difficult for him to gather cultivation technique manuals as his cultivation advanced. Besides, he couldn't allow the grayish gaseous substance to continue growing either, or else he would eventually become a puppet of the heaven. Thus, he knew that he had no other choice but to embark on this route. For 3 days straight, he sat motionlessly on the same spot, not eating or drinking at all. 3 days in the azure equated to roughly 300 days in the great codex of spring and autumn. Unknowingly, almost a single year had already passed for Zhongxian. Within this single year, Zhongxian didn't rest a single wink. His exhaustion had caused his eyes to turn scarlet. If not for the fact that his cultivation had reached heavenly high immortal realm, he would have already suffered a breakdown by now. This doesn't work. This isn't working either. Just a bit more. Why am I always off by just a bit? Just like that, another 7 days passed in the azure. In this period of time, Zhongxian had come up with at least 10,000 possible ingenious cultivation technique manuals, but they were either infeasible for his current body or that there was still something lacking with it that he was dissatisfied with. Eventually, he had no choice but to give up and return his consciousness to his physical body. It had only been 10 days in the real world, but he had already spent nearly 3 years in the great codex of spring and autumn. Working intensely throughout this period of time had left his mind deeply withered. He felt desperate. If he couldn't create a cultivation technique, he wouldn't be able to achieve a breakthrough. And if he were to head to the Hall of Gods in his current state, he would only be courting his own death. Sighing deeply, he walked out of the silent chamber to first deal with the matters he had at hand. He quickly found one of the elders of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion and asked, "How is the search going on? Have you found her yet?" After returning from the Master Teacher continent, he had the elders of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion to inform the 7-Star Pavilion, Myriad Beasts Hall, and Starchaser Palace to look into Luo Chich's whereabouts. Considering that 10 days had passed, they should have some results by now. Chapter 2080. The heavens would have withered if they had feelings. Sect leader Zhong. The four sects have dispatched several 100,000 disciples to comb through all of the cities in the Azure, but no one has seen or heard of Miss Luo Chichi. The elder clasped his fist and replied, "There's no news at all." Zhong Xian frowned. Since Luo Shenqing said that Luo Chichi had overcome the dimension barrier of the master-teacher continent to ascend to a higher world, there should be a good chance that she had come here. So how could there be no news on her at all? Zhong Xian trusted the competency of the information network of the four sects. If they weren't able to find her within 10 days, there was indeed a good chance that she wasn't on the Azure then. If she didn't come to the Azure after ascending from the master-teacher continent, where else could she be? I'll have to think about this matter carefully later on. Zhong Xian thought. There was nothing he could do about this matter at the moment, so he shook his head and headed to where his disciples were cultivating. Over the past 10 days, his disciples had made great advancements. Zhao Ya, Zheng Yang, and the others had managed to reach true immortal realm within this period of time. Even Yuan Dao, who tended to lag behind the others, managed to reach heavenly pseudo-immortal realm. As for Bai Ruanqing, she had successfully achieved a breakthrough to high immortal realm, making her one of the strongest experts in the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion of her generation. Seeing that they were cultivating diligently, Zhong Xian heaved a sigh of relief. Then, with a heavy heart, he began trudging his way back to the silent chamber to go into seclusion once more when he suddenly heard a commotion not too far away. "Young master, you must redress my grievances. I, your beloved son Qiong, has been accompanied you for so many years. We have been together since our time in Tianxian Kingdom. You can't possibly be thinking of replacing me with this darned bandit, right?" A particularly exaggerated exclamation sounded in the distance as a fatty ran into the courtyard. It went without saying that this fatty was Sun Qiong. Over the past 10 days, he had managed to make his way from Shenjiang City to the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. With Zhong Xian's weapon serving as a symbol of his identity, it wasn't too difficult for him to gain entry. And alas, he eventually had his fated meeting with the bandit Cao Chengli. The two of them proclaimed themselves as Zhong Xian's one and only butler, and the argument got so heated that they even came to blows with one another. While Cao Chengli was an expert of the Azure, his cultivation had also only reached Ancient Sage 4 Dan 2, which was roughly the same level as Sun Qiong. As a result, the battle was inconclusive. However, none of them was contented with leaving things just like that. So, when they heard that Zhong Xian had come out of seclusion, they immediately ran over Godspeed. "Young master, this fellow popped out of nowhere and claimed that he is your butler. Not only so, he even dared to make a move on me." Cao Chengli was a feisty man who wouldn't back down in the face of an argument. The already exhausted Zhong Xian felt like his head was ringing from all of the shouting going on. He waved his hands in irritation and said, "It's just a mere butler position. Is there a need for the two of you to fight like that? Don't you find it embarrassing? Things aren't as simple as that. As a butler, we must be sharp on our feet in order to tend to our young master's every need. Too many soups would only spoil the broth. If we were to come to a disagreement as to what to do, who should we listen to then?" Sun Qiong exclaimed indignantly. "Young master, I have followed you for so long, and I dare say that there's no one in this world who knows you better than I do. There's no way this half-baked rascal who popped out of nowhere will be able to service you better than I do. You." Cao Chengli gritted his teeth in fury. "Young master, this fellow is obviously unreliable with just a single glance. As a butler, we have to make sure to keep the big picture in mind so that we can share your burden. I don't believe that this fellow is up to the task at all." Seeing how these two were bickering with one another yet again, Zhong Xian could only rub his glabella to ease his pulsing headache. To be honest, he really didn't want to choose between either of them at all. Sun Qiong was a darned braggart down to his bones. No matter what he was faced with, regardless of what kinds of troubles that would ensue as a result of his actions, his topmost priority was always to satisfy his desire to brag first. With that fearless character of his, there was no doubt that he would bring him a lot of trouble in the future. On the other hand, the bandit Cao Chengli was a person driven by his lower body. Satisfying his lust seemed to be his top priority, making him an even more unreliable person than Sun Qiong. Sigh. He would have never thought that someone as reliable like him would end up taking these two troublemakers as his butler. And to make things worse, these two fellows were even bickering over this position at this moment. Unable to take the noise any longer, Zhong Xian eventually cried out, "Enough! Sun Qiong shall be my butler, understood?" If he really had to choose between these two, Sun Qiong was definitely the more reliable one. At the very least, that fatty had never disappointed him when it came to information gathering and uncovering monetary opportunities. But I. Cao Chengli immediately panicked upon hearing that verdict. "I'll task you with the responsibility of taking care of Dan Xiaotian and my other direct disciples instead," Zhong Xian said. A moment later, he quickly added, "Know that I'll hold you responsible if any of them were to go astray. Considering how hot-blooded Jing Yang, Yuan Dao, and the others were, it would really be tough if Cao Chengli were to lead them astray." "Yes, I understand." Cao Chengli quickly nodded his head. At the current moment, he was only glad that the young master wasn't trying to drive him away. Zhong Xian pondered for a moment longer before he turned to Sun Qiong and instructed, "Since you are here, I need you to look into Chichi's whereabouts. Based on what I have heard, she should have already arrived in the Azure." "Miss Chichi is in the Azure too?" Sun Qiong was slightly surprised to hear the news. He quickly patted his chest confidently and said, "Young master, leave it to me. As soon as she appears, I'll bring her over to you." "Good." Zhong Xian nodded. He felt a lot more assured in trusting this task to Sun Qiong. As an ex-businessman, Sun Qiong was exceptionally capable at networking in order to get things done. After being entrusted with the job, Sun Qiong didn't leave right away. Instead, after hesitating for a brief moment, he finally asked, "Young master, I hope you don't blame me for probing too much into your affairs, but Miss Chichi has really done a lot for you. Do you really feel nothing for her at all?" As someone who was probably the closest to Zhong Xian in his days at the master-teacher continent, Sun Qiong was well aware of Luo Chichi's feelings toward Zhong Xian. For Zhong Xian, she was willing to turn against her own clan members and even sacrifice herself. Yet, Zhong Xian showed no signs of reciprocating her feelings at all. Zhong Xian was silent for a moment before he shook his head solemnly, "I don't." Ever since his days at Tianxian Kingdom, there were many ladies who were interested in him. Shunbai Yu, Mo Yu, Zhao Feiwu, Hu Yao Yao, Yu Feia. All of them were stunning, outstanding ladies, but he felt nothing for them at all. The same went for Luo Chichi too. It was probably cliché to say this, but his heart seemed to only beat for Luo Ruoxin. There was just something about her that drew him in, and despite the short time they had spent together, he was unable to forget about her at all. His heart was simply too filled at the moment to house another person. "She's such a nice lady, but you have no feelings at all. What a cold-blooded man." Sun Qiong murmured quietly beneath his lips. Even though he was Zhong Xian's butler, he couldn't help but feel bad for Luo Chichi. Cold-blooded man? Zhong Xian's eyebrows rose up in fury when his eyes suddenly widened in astonishment. A thought struck his mind. Was he really a cold-blooded man without feelings? Definitely not. His sentiments toward his parents were still a little awkward, but they were definitely existent. His care of his students and those around him were definitely genuine as well. He wasn't a very expressive person, but he didn't consider himself as someone who didn't have feelings either. But thinking back on it now, ever since he transcended over and obtained the Library of Heaven's Path, his desire for romance seemed to have died out. He was only an ordinary librarian in his previous life, and he had died as a single too. Under normal circumstances, he should have been excited by the notion that there were beautiful ladies who were interested in him, but he felt nothing at all. Furthermore, other than affairs relating to Luo Ruoxin and his direct disciples, he found that he was able to remain perfectly rational under most circumstances. It was not that he didn't feel emotions, but his emotions rarely trh over his rationality. More often than not, even in the direst of situations, he was always able to analyze everything rationally with a calm mind. He thought that it was the effect of comprehending Heart of Tranquil Water previously, but from the looks of it now, things weren't as simple as he thought. Could this actually be a side effect of the Library of Heaven's Path? There was a saying in his previous world that the heavens would have withered if they had feelings. Be it the heavens' order or the heavens' imperfections, they were abilities built on logic. Emotions and feelings had no place with the heavens at all. This discompassionate nature of the heavens was what allowed all beings to be equals in their eyes. No matter how just unjust happened in the world, it was none of the business of the heavens at all. The natural cycles of the world wouldn't stop for anyone, not even in the slightest. All along, Zhongxian hadn't thought much of the matter. It was only after hearing Sun Qiong's words that he came to a realization. It made him question if the library of Heaven's path had gradually chipped away at his emotions. After all, there was no denying that Luo Chichi had done a lot for him. If it had been anyone else in his place, his heart would have probably softened by now. Yet, he remained completely unfazed, almost as if he was devoid of emotions. In fact, now that he thought back, it always felt like he was looking at this issue from an outsider's point of view, allowing him to analyze it with solely reason and logic. He couldn't help but wonder if the other emotions he felt would slowly die out as well as the grayish gaseous substance grew within his body. Would his feelings for Luo Ruoxin die out as well once he became assimilated by the heavens? With such a thought in mind, a realization came to Zhongxian. Heaven's order commanded all beings to follow a certain law of nature, whereas heaven's imperfections dictated that all beings are flawed and incomplete. Only feelings didn't obey any logic and reason at all. It compels people to do all kinds of things that are beyond reason. There were many things in this world that had certain laws that one had to obey, but were emotions something that necessarily obeyed laws too? Of course not. If feelings were logical, back then, when the world needed him to marry Luo Chichi in order to save the world, he should have fallen in love with her. Yet, he ended up becoming fond of Luo Ruoxin instead. There were all sorts of illogical things in the world that occurred as a result of uncontrollable emotions. If a person was really able to control his emotions, who wouldn't want to keep this unstable factor in reign? It was just a pity that the one thing that was hardest to control in the world was emotions. It was a unique state of mind that entranced people yet leaving them helpless so. Were emotions flawed? Did love have imperfections? That was probably the case. But at the same time, it was also what that gave life colors as well. Innumerable people devoted themselves to the pursuit of love, and they were willing to condemn themselves in hopes of achieving romantic fulfillment. If so, perhaps emotions shouldn't be considered as a liability but as a wonderment of life instead. I see. A sharp glint flashed across Zhongxian's eyes. The heavens would have withered if they had feelings. If feelings are something which even is beyond the jurisdiction of the heavens, what do I have to be conflicted over? So, the cultivation technique which I have been searching for has been here all along. In the 3 years that Zhongxian had spent in the Great Codex of Spring and Autumn, he ended up cornering himself. He had been trying to find a way to surpass the heavens, but how could he possibly outdo the already flawless Heaven's Path divine art? No matter how great and refined his creation was, the best that he could have done was to create a cultivation technique equaling it. There was no way he could have surpassed it. That was also the reason why he hadn't been able to succeed despite 3 years of effort. It was only at this moment did he realize that he had been walking down the wrong route right from the start. All along, he already had something that surpassed the heavens right inside of him. There were those whose love transcended all logic and reason, lasting for thousands of years. There were those who were willing to give their lives away for the sake of protecting those whom they cared about. Kinship, friendship, romance. Luo Chichi was willing to give in so much to him without any regrets. Zhong Hongtian was willing to give even his final breath to protect humanity without asking for anything in return. Ancient sage Yang Hui was willing to leave his corpse behind so as to seal off the spatial passageway to the Azure for tens of thousands of years. Be it the master-teacher continent or the Azure, there were simply too many decisions in life that were made out of sheer emotions instead of reasons. Tens of thousands of years had passed in the master-teacher continent, but it wasn't enough to erase Kongsha's greatness. The heavens had killed generation after generation of people, but the deep respect that the people felt toward Kongsha remained firm and unwavering. Not even the rationality of the heavens can subdue the irrationality of emotions. Boom. Zhongxian's body jolted as a surge of energy began surging up his dantian. He could feel the bottleneck to semi-divinity realm was swiftly unraveling itself. Sun Qiong, thank you. Zhongxian looked at Sun Qiong and burst into laughter. After that, he turned around and returned back to the silent chamber. Seeing how the young master thanked himself instead of flying to a temper despite his deeply disrespectful words, Sun Qiong blinked his eyes in bewilderment. Did the young master go mad? On the other hand, Cao Chungli's mouth was twitching after seeing the sight before him. Back then, just because he had unintentionally offended the young master, the latter made it so that he had no choice but to leap back into their accommodations. Yet, when this fatty insulted him, not only did the young master not berate him, he even thanked him. Thinking back, the young master never seemed to show any interest toward the ladies before. Could it be that he only had feelings for Sun Qiong? Cao Chungli immediately turned to look at Sun Qiong, only to heave a deep sigh in the next moment. Just how heavy must the young master's taste be to actually like this fellow? Chapter 2081 Zhongxian achieves a breakthrough to the semi-divinity realm. Swallowing premier immortal pills one after another, Zhongxian released the unique aura that he had collected from the circular platforms alongside the Azure Bridge and allowed it to swirl around him like a tornado. Sitting quietly in the midst of the tremendous air currents, his heavenly high immortal realm cultivation slowly rose bit by bit. After overcoming his previous bottleneck, Zhongxian saw another towering mountain peak appearing right before his eyes. It was a majestic mountain that pierced right into the heavens. As he assimilated the medicinal energy from the premier immortal pills, he was able to gather the power required for him to scale the mountain a step at a time. When he finally reached the very peak of the mountain, he saw a familiar silhouette standing before him, Sun Qiong. Sun Qiong was currently pacing around the top of the mountain in a panic. He was trapped and could not leave this mountain peak at all. The memories of the time Zhongxian had spent with Sun Qiong gradually floated in his mind. "Old master, are you here to buy a house?" These were the very first words that Sun Qiong had said when they first met one another. "Your humble servant's name is Sun Qiong. You can call me Xiao Qiong." Those were the words that Sun Qiong said when their relationship as master and butler had been sealed. Time seemed to pass relentlessly like a flowing river. Sun Qiong had not been the most reliable of subordinates, and his desire to brag was at odds with Zhongxian's humble and low-profile character. However, the 2 years that they had spent together had allowed them to get used to each other's existence, and they had come to familiarize themselves with each other's temperament and habits. Zhongxian spent most of his time cultivating, leaving any important miscellaneous affairs for Sun Qiong to deal with. Before he had even realized it, this master-butler relationship had become something extremely important to him. Nothing could substitute Sun Qiong's existence to him anymore. Zhongxian harumphed nonchalantly. "I'll save you." He raised his hand up and chopped it down with great might. Boom! The mountain peak split in two before everything abruptly disappeared. There was no more mountain peak and Sun Qiong. At the same time, the bottleneck limiting his cultivation vanished as well. The doors leading to the semi-divinity realm broke open. "So, these are the feelings between a master and a subordinate," Zhongxian thought with a smile as he drove his zhenqi according to the feeling that he felt within him. Back when he was cultivating the Heaven's Path divine art, he had limited his zhenqi to flow strictly in accordance with the circulation pathway defined in the cultivation technique. That was the only way he could cultivate unparalleled zhenqi and maximize his fighting prowess. However, he decided to limit himself no longer. Letting completely loose, he allowed his zhenqi to flow along with his feelings. He could feel it. Everything could be a cultivation technique. Everything could be a battle technique. Even emotions could be used as a cultivation technique. Even emotions could be utilized as a sword. Hong long long. The resounding chimes of a bell echoed in his ears as spiritual energy surged endlessly into his body, causing his strength to grow exponentially. Semi-divinity realm. That realm that had stunted the growth of countless geniuses of the Azure, he had finally reached it. Zhongxian continued putting more and more premier immortal pills into his mouth, and the unique aura shrouding him swiftly depleted. A long time later, he finally opened his eyes once more. At this moment, he had already finished using all the premier immortal pills that he had acquired from the ethereal hall, and he had used a total of 20 sets of the unique aura gathered from the circular platforms. While others only needed a single set to achieve a breakthrough, he had actually needed 20 people's worth. It's a pity that I only managed to raise his cultivation to greater semidivinity realm. I am still a long way off from reaching heavenly semidivinity realm. Zhongxian sighed deeply. Ultimately, the amount of premier immortal pills he had was still insufficient. Furthermore, due to his breakthrough, the quality of spiritual energy that he required to make a breakthrough rose once again. Thus, he was only able to make a breakthrough to greater semidivinity realm with the 20 premier immortal pills he had in hand before losing his momentum. Zhongxian contemplated for a moment before coming up with the name for his new cultivation technique. This is a cultivation technique that I managed to create through comprehending my own emotions. Since that's the case, I shall call it Pathos of Heaven. Perhaps because it was Sun Qiong's reminder that had enabled him to achieve a breakthrough to the semidivinity realm, the first sentimentality he comprehended was the sentiments between a master and a subordinate. The quintessence behind such a relation lay in mutual trust. Sun Qiong had never been a strong individual, but he was willing to stand against stronger opponents and even the entire master-teacher pavilion for his sake. Standing steadfast in the face of danger for the one he had decided to stand with, this represented the values of loyalty and brotherhood. Infused with emotions, the Heaven's Path divine art was clearly vastly different from before. It seemed to have gained its own spirituality, harnessing its own powers. Let me test its might, Zhongxian thought. He gathered his strength within his palm and lightly thrust it forth. Peng! The stable space before him immediately tore open, revealing a pitch-black dimension rift. Zhongxian was stunned. He had seen plenty of semidivinity realm experts. In fact, 8 of his tamed beasts had already reached the semi-divinity realm. As such, he knew what the usual strength of a semidivinity realm cultivator was. In terms of fighting prowess, he was already on par with the overwhelmingly powerful semidivinity realm cultivator whom he had faced on the ocean of exiled stars. He had never thought that he would gain so much strength right after his breakthrough. Even if that semidivinity realm cultivator were to explode his cultivation before him once more, he would not sustain the slightest harm at all. Come out! With a wave of his hand, Zhongxian brought out the serpentine dragon, 9-headed fiery phoenix, and the Tongzhang sword. Use your strongest attacks against me, Zhongxian instructed. Hu. The 2 semidivinity realm beasts and a semidivinity artifact formed a collaborative formation and launched a furious barrage of attacks against Zhongxian. In response, Zhongxian sat on the ground without moving a single step. All he did was use his finger as a sword to deflect their attacks. A few moments later, the attacking trio collapsed weakly on the ground, unable to move at all. Despite their collaborative offense, they had not been able to force him to his feet. Master, your strength. The serpentine dragon and the 9-headed fiery phoenix could hardly believe what was happening. They had thought that they had reached the top of the Forsaken Continent by having achieved a breakthrough to the semidivinity realm, but to their disbelief, they found that they were no different from novices before their master. They could not even withstand a single strike from the other party. I had an epiphany earlier and successfully made a breakthrough to the semidivinity realm. Zhongxian chuckled softly as he finally rose his feet. He stowed the trio back into his tamed beast sack and storage ring before summoning the one he had been wanting to deal with all this while, his clone. You. Let's trade blows. Peng. The swollen-faced Zhongxian struggled back to his feet as he snarled with twitching lips, darn it. Just you wait. I'll challenge you again once I reach heavenly semidivinity realm. Shrugging nonchalantly, the clone returned to the storage ring. Sighing deeply, Zhongxian shook his head. His clone was truly a pervert. Not only did he manage to achieve a breakthrough to the semidivinity realm over the past few days, he had actually figured out a way to advance his cultivation to heavenly semidivinity realm. Thus, it was only a given that he would be no match for his clone. Nevertheless, it was certain that he had gotten much stronger after comprehending the pathos of heaven. While his greater semidivinity realm strength did lose out to his clone's heavenly semidivinity realm cultivation, the gap was not that big anymore. As long as he could make a few more breakthroughs, there was a good chance that he could stand on par with his clone even when they were in the same cultivation realm. But where in the world can I find more premier immortal pills? With his current cultivation realm, ordinary pills, and even the blood essence of semidivinity realm experts were no longer effective on him. He needed something more potent than those. The only thing he could think of that was still effective to him was the premier immortal pills. However, those pills were known to be incredibly expensive and rare, such that even a major sect like the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion was unlikely to have too many of them. Leaving the silent chamber, Zhongxian headed to the sect treasury, a place where only the sect leader of each generation was authorized to enter. He did manage to find some premier immortal pills there, but there were only 10 of them in total. Let's head to Starchaser Palace together. Having achieved a breakthrough in his cultivation, Zhongxian did not think that there was any need for him to stay there any longer. Thus, he called Zhao Ya, Sun Qiong, and the others over before bringing out the serpentine dragon. Together, they got onto the back of the serpentine dragon, and soon, they were well on their way to Starchaser Palace. 3 days later, entering the main hall of Starchaser Palace once more, Zhongxian met Jiang Yaro, Zhao Yu, Kue Xiao, Qin Yuan, Han Zhenqiu, and the core elders of the 4 sects. He had sent a request previously for the other 3 sects to bring all of their premier immortal pills to Starchaser Palace. Nevertheless, they only managed to scrape together 27 of them. In other words, Zhongxian only had 37 premier immortal pills with him at the moment. Zhongxian quickly headed to a silent chamber in Starchaser Palace before swallowing all the premier immortal pills at once. After several minutes, he successfully advanced his cultivation to earthly semidivinity realm. As my cultivation increases, the effectiveness of the pills is clearly lowering. Previously, 20 pills were enough for me to reach greater semidivinity realm, but now, even after I consumed 37 pills, I was only able to advance my cultivation by a single stage. At this rate, I'll need at least 100 pills to reach heavenly semidivinity realm. His requirement for spiritual energy increased exponentially alongside his cultivation, and that had always been a severe headache for him. Where in the world was he supposed to find 100 premier immortal pills? Seeing right through Zhongxian's thoughts, Han Zhenqiu explained, Sect leader Zhong, premier immortal pills are known to be a cultivation resource that only semidivinity realm cultivators are able to use. The 6 sects usually only have 1 expert of such caliber, so it's inevitable that we haven't stockpiled too many of them in our inventory. However, it is a different case for the ethereal hall. Possessing a complete god character, it's likely that they have many semidivinity realm cultivators in their ranks. Given so, it's highly likely that they have quite a number of premier immortal pills with them. In other words, the ethereal hall has plenty of premier immortal pills. Zhongxian clarified. Indeed. Thinking back, the 20 premier immortal pills that he had were from the ethereal hall. Given that the ethereal hall had remained the dominant power for thousands of years, it went without saying that its treasury was much fuller than those of the 6 sects. The only problem was that he was at loggerheads with the head of their organization, not to mention that he had inadvertently induced the destruction of its headquarters. Even if he demanded premier immortal pills from them, it was likely that they would not give any to him, but I guess that it's still worth a try. I do still have the token that Kongsha gave me, so there's a chance that the disciples of the ethereal hall will be forced to provide me with whatever I need, Zhongxian thought with a glint in his eyes. He had been hesitant to use it after realizing that it was the thing that had been giving away his location to the Hall of Gods, resulting in the assassination attempts time and time again. However, now that his cultivation had reached earthly semidivinity realm, there was no one in this world who could threaten him other than Kongsha. What else did he have to fear? In fact, he would be extremely glad if Kongsha came personally for him. That would save him the hassle of having to hunt him down. Zhongxian looked at Han Zhenqiu and asked, "Is it still possible to enter the ethereal hall?" Realizing the devious thoughts that were in Zhongxian's mind, Han Zhenqiu could not help but chuckle to himself as he replied, "Of course." Even though the headquarters of the ethereal hall had been destroyed, The other branches remained perfectly intact. Cultivators could still enter and leave it as they pleased, and the teleportation service of purchased objects was still working as usual. "I'll be heading in for a moment," Zhongxian informed them. He took out the ethereal token that he had been using and quickly immersed his consciousness into it. Soon, he found himself standing before a familiar tower. Without any hesitation, he made his way over to the receptionist and passed the token that he had received from Kongsha over. "I want 100 Premier Immortal Pills," Zhongxian demanded coolly. 100 Premier Immortal Pills? The elder of the ethereal hall shuddered in horror upon hearing the ridiculous demand. He glanced at the token in the young man's hand before anxiously flipping through the records. A moment later, he said, "We don't have that many Premier Immortal Pills here at the moment. However, we can transfer the stock from other branches over. I think we should be able to gather the required amount within a day's time." "Good. Give me everything that you have at the moment, and I'll collect everything else a day from now," Zhongxian replied. "Why yes, esteemed guest." The elder quickly rushed into a room, and roughly an hour later, he passed several jade bottles over. "There are 30 Premier Immortal Pills here in total. UN. Zhongxian nodded in satisfaction before retracting his consciousness out of the ethereal hall. He had worried that Kongsha would have revoked his privileges after revealing his true color, but to his surprise, it was still working. Most likely, Kongsha is so busy recuperating from the injuries that he sustained from the clone a while back that he forgot about this matter. However, this will be last time that I can tap into this privilege. Even though the elder had said that he would gather the remaining 70 Premier Immortal Pills by tomorrow, the problem was that it was even more likely that news would reach the headquarters of the ethereal hall before then. Once that happened, the privileges that he enjoyed through the token would be annulled, and the 70 Premier Immortal Pills would never reach his hands. After all, there was no way Kongsha would be so foolish as to provide his enemy with the cultivation resources that he needed to power up. As such, he could only take away as much as he could in the earlier transaction. Chapter 2082 The Two Altars. After demanding the Premier Immortal Pills from the ethereal hall, Zhongxian headed over to an empty area above the ocean of exiled stars and waited patiently in case someone came for him. But just as he expected, no one from the Hall of Gods arrived even after he waited for some time. He could not help but feel a little downcast. In the past, Kongsha would sponsor him with pills to eat and bodies to forge, but there was nothing at all anymore. If only I'd known this would happen. I would have made sure to squeeze the ethereal hall dry before challenging the Hall of Gods. Zhongxian waited for another 2 more hours, but there was no trace of anyone at all. In the end, he had no choice but to return to Starchaser Palace. I recall Kongsha saying that he has been suppressed for several thousand years and hasn't fully recovered yet. Furthermore, he used a huge portion of his energy to massacre and seal off the Hall of Gods. So, it's safe to assume that his true strength is much greater than what he displayed back then. However, just who in the world has the ability to suppress him? The fact that Kongsha was able to massacre the Hall of Gods was enough to show just how powerful he was. Even a transcendental organization like the Hall of Gods did not have the capability to deal with him. Given so, it was hard to believe that there was a person in the Azure who was powerful enough to suppress him for several thousand years, such that he had only been able to regain consciousness recently. Zhongxian thought about the matter for a while, but he was still unable to make sense of the matter. Eventually, he could only drop all thoughts. Heading to a silent chamber, he swallowed the 30 Premier Immortal Pills that he had just acquired and managed to advance his cultivation a fair bit. However, he was still some distance away from reaching Heavenly Semidivinity Realm by the end of it. Nevertheless, feeling the incredible strength pulsating in his body, Zhongxian felt compelled to test his fighting prowess once again. So, with a vicious glint in his eyes, he summoned his clone once more. This time, the two of them actually managed to fight on equal ground with one another. His strength was on par with his clone's. Furthermore, he had not used his swordsmanship yet. It seems like I'm finally stronger than my clone. Zhongxian heaved a sigh of relief. Ever since he created his clone 2 years ago, he had been dominated by the latter time and time again. It was only after he created his own cultivation technique that he finally managed to slightly surpass his clone. "It's about time for me to head to the Hall of Gods," Zhongxian murmured as he walked out of his room confidently. He should head to the Hall of Gods to save Du Qingyuan and settle the grudges with Kong Shi once and for all. So, he quickly gathered Zhao Yu, Jiang Yao, and the others before getting Wu Chen to bring out the altar from the otherworldly demonic tribe. "Sect leader Zhong, I'm a little worried about this matter. Since you have been able to think of this, it's likely that the other party has been able to figure it out as well. There's a good chance that he has laid a trap for you over there, waiting for you to walk right in," Han Zhenqiu said worriedly. The fact that Kong Shi knew of the chance of the ritual meant that he had a deep understanding of what the altar was capable of. At the very least, it was safe to assume that his knowledge surpassed that of every single one of them present. It was even possible that Kong Shi had planned for everything to develop like this. He had intentionally sealed off all routes so that Zhongxian would have no choice but to rely on the altar to reach him. "I won't be able to save Du Qingyuan if I don't do this. I can't afford to continue wasting time here." Zhongxian shook his head. He had thought of this possibility as well, but he knew that he could not afford to continue waiting. He had fought with Kong Shi before, and the latter already possessed strength on par with his clone when he had not fully recovered. Once the latter regained his full might, the chances of victory would be extremely slim. By then, it would be one thing if he was killed, but even those around him might fall prey to Kong Shi as well. As such, he knew that he could not back down. Zhao Ya and the others walked forward and said, "Teacher, we wish to go with you as well. You are still too weak at the moment. I have stored the unique aura you will require to reach the semi-divinity realm in here. Cultivate diligently. You'll be able to help me once you reach the semi-divinity realm," Zhongxian said. With a wave of his hand, he passed the jade bottles over that he had prepared for his direct disciples beforehand. Zhao Ya and the others had the necessary cultivation techniques and cultivation resources for them to make a breakthrough, but unfortunately, their time in the Azure had simply been too limited. As such, they were still a long way off from reaching the semi-divinity realm. If they followed him to the Hall of Gods, there was a high chance that they would end up being captured and used as hostages to keep him in check. Since that was the case, it would be better for them to focus on their cultivation so that they could reach the semi-divinity realm as quickly as possible. Knowing that they were not in a position to help their teacher, Zhao Ya and the others clenched their fists tightly in agitation. They hated the fact that they were weak. It had always been like this. Their teacher would stand at the forefront and brave all kinds of danger, whereas they could only stand helplessly behind him. They detested this feeling of helplessness. After dealing with his direct disciples, Zhongxian turned his gaze to Han Zhenqiu. "Han Zhenqiu, I have developed a deeper understanding of the god's sword intent in recent days. I_LL impart it to you now." "Thank you, sect leader Zhong," Han Zhenqiu replied as his eyes reddened slightly. He had been studying the method to comprehend the god's sword intent that Zhongxian had given him a few days ago. He could feel himself coming very close to that level, but he was simply unable to take the final step forward. He had a feeling that the new insights from Zhongxian would be the key that he required for a breakthrough. Once he had comprehended the god's sword intent, with his strength as a semi-divinity realm expert, even if he was unable to emulate the greatness of the founder, at the very least, he would have the strength to protect the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion from the Ethereal Hall and the Hall of Gods. It was just that he could not help but feel as if Zhongxian was delegating his will, and this made him feel a little heavy inside. However, this insight comes from my own comprehension, so it'll deviate significantly from the god's sword intent of the sect. If you wish to study it, you'll have to come under my lineage and become my student. May I know if you're willing to do that?" Zhongxian asked after a moment of hesitation. It was not that he was trying to humiliate Han Zhenqiu. Rather, he was using this as one final attempt to induce the creation of another golden page before facing Kong Shi. He was going to head to the lair of the enemies very soon. Even though he had raised his cultivation significantly, honestly speaking, he was not confident of victory. If he could just obtain a single golden page, he would be in a much more favorable position than before. He was not too certain what the conditions for producing the golden page were, But he knew that one of the key elements was genuine gratitude to him as a teacher. "It would be my honor to become your student." Han Jianqiu nodded without any hesitation. There were many renowned experts in the world who were only willing to pass down their secret arts to those in their lineage. Considering the profoundness and ingenuity of the god's sword intent, it was understandable why Zhongxian might be reluctant to pass it down to someone who was not in his lineage even if he was the sect leader. Han Jianqiu had already seen past the transiency of what humans defined as pride and dignity. He did not think that it was a big deal for him to become the student of someone much younger than him. Seeing that Han Jianqiu had agreed to it, Zhongxian tapped his finger lightly and infused a sliver of his will into the other party's mind. Upon receiving Zhongxian's swordsmanship insights, he immediately took out his sword and began practicing his swordplay. He had already reached an extremely high level in swordsmanship, such that it was extremely hard for him to progress any higher. Yet, his swordplay still seemed to be getting much sharper and more unpredictable with each move he made. Eventually, it came to a point where something seemed to shatter within him. Following that, his energy suddenly surged, and his entire being seemed to have morphed into a cold, sharp sword. "Finally, I have managed to reach this level." Han Jianqiu's hands were trembling. In order to comprehend the god's sword intent, he had devoted more than 100 years to practicing his swordsmanship, but alas, success had always eluded him. He had eventually come to think that this day would not come in his lifetime. "Teacher, thank you for fulfilling my greatest wish." Han Jianqiu kneeled onto the floor and bowed deeply out of respect. Upon seeing this, Zhongxian quickly brought his consciousness to the library of Heaven's Path, but even after waiting for a while, there was nothing at all. A golden page had not been created. He frowned. The golden page would usually appear after this, especially in times when he really needed it. Why did it have to fail at this crucial moment? Sighing internally, Zhongxian quickly walked forward and helped Han Jianqiu up. "There's no need to stand on ceremony." Following that, he turned his gaze to Jiang Yao, Qin Yuan, and Kue Xiao. He tried the same method on them as well. He imparted his comprehension of cultivation, beast taming, and battle techniques to them, and the trio benefited greatly from his teaching. They managed to rise to greater heights, and they expressed their deep gratitude to him for guiding them. Fortunately, a golden page was generated this time around. It came from Jiang Yao. "Just as I thought, gratitude isn't the only thing that is required. Most likely, it has something to do with the intensity of one's desire as well," Zhongxian thought as he heaved a sigh of relief. Han Jianqiu, Kue Xiao, and Qin Yuan were grateful toward him as well, but as heads of their respective sects, as well as semi-divinity realm experts, their desire for strength had already waned significantly. Even if they were thankful to Zhongxian, the feelings they felt were not that strong. It was similar to how you could treat a cook to a Manchu Han imperial feast, and the latter still would not feel too grateful to you. On the other hand, if you gave a lollipop to a little child, they would think that you are the best person in the entire world. A person who had undergone more turmoil would gradually let go of their desires. Jiang Yao was not the head of Starchaser Palace, and in the city of collapsed space, she had nearly lost her life. Thus, she recognized how desperately she was in need of strength, so the gratitude she felt toward Zhongxian, who lent her a helping hand when she was at a loss as to what she could do, was understandable. There were probably more conditions required for the generation of the golden page, but this was all he could deduce for the time being. Thinking about it, gratitude is also one of the invaluable emotions that a human has, Zhongxian thought deeply. Perhaps, if he had paid more attention to this trivial detail, he might have been able to come up with the pathos of heavens much earlier. He would not have spent so many years racking his brain to come up with something. With everything in place, Zhongxian turned to Wu Chen and said, "Let's begin." "Who?" With a wave of his hands, Wu Chen filled the altar with tributes. Then, with a snap of his fingers, all the tributes began burning up. At the same time, the altar began rising into the air, emanating an aura that seemed to stop one's breathing. Wu Chen began to chant out loud. The flames on the altar blazed, and the space around it began to distort, gradually forming something reminiscent of a door. "Teacher, why don't I head over first to see if there is any danger? If there is a threat on the other side, We can strategize and come up with an appropriate countermeasure, Han Jianqiu anxiously proposed. I'll do it instead. My strength might not be on par with you, but I have plenty of life preservation means, Elder Kue Xiao said. Seeing how worried those two were, Zhongxian shot them a confident smile and said, there's no need for that. I'll enter first, and you can follow behind me if you like. Even if the enemy is the Hall of Gods, we still have to show them the price of messing with us. Sounds good. The others cheered passionately in agreement. How long had it been since they barged into the Hall of Gods? Their predecessors had succeeded a long time ago, and perhaps it was time for a new legend to be born. Regardless of whether they succeeded or not, since the Hall of Gods had already bared its fangs against them, the 6 sects would have to make a stand as well to show that they were not to be trifled with. Who? Zhongxian walked up to the door and entered it. He saw the space around him distorting entirely. With a smile on his lips, he brought out his clone before entering his storage ring. Just as the others had said, the Hall of Gods was fraught with dangers. There was a good chance that Kongsha had already laid out an elaborate trap for him. Given that his clone was indestructible, there was no one more suited than it to serve as the vanguard. Driving his zhenqi, the clone took a step forward and walked out of the portal. Where is this? Before his eyes was neither the Hall of Gods nor the exploded headquarters of the ethereal hall. Instead, it was a long, narrow passageway that went on and on amid the void. The altar that he had teleported to was currently right beneath his feet. Chapter 2083 The Mysterious Palace. There's nothing here at all? An identical figure appeared right beside Zhongxian's clone. He thought that he would immediately be faced with the offense of innumerable semi-divinity realm cultivators once he teleported over, but there was no one in sight at all. However, there seems to be something really suspicious about this place. The more empty the place looked, the more unnerving it felt. Leaping off the altar, Zhongxian was intending to wait for Kue Xiao and the others to come over when he suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. He immediately reached forward to grab the altar. But before his hand could reach the altar, a burst of sword chi shot out from below. Catcher, catcher, catcher. The domineering energy tore the altar into smithereens. As a result of the destruction of the altar, the dimension portal between the two altars vanished. Pu. On the other side of the portal, Wu Chen spurted a mouthful of blood. His face turned pale from weakness, and his body trembled uncontrollably. What's wrong? Noticing Wu Chen's current state, Kue Xiao and the others quickly turned their gazes over. Someone destroyed the altar on the other side and severed the connection. Zhongsha won't be able to return anymore. Wu Chen muttered with eyes widened in horror. What do you mean by that? Everyone was stunned to hear those words. There is only one altar from the Starchaser Palace. Its destruction means that the only pathway to the Hall of Gods has been severed. We won't be able to head over to save him anymore even if we wish to do so. Similarly, he won't be able to return back here through the altar anymore. Wu Chen replied. This. Realizing the graveness of the situation, the crowd looked at one another in astonishment. The eyes of Zhao Ya and the others also reddened in agitation. Doesn't this mean that our teacher is in grave danger? It's all our fault. If not for our weakness, our teacher wouldn't have been placed in such a precarious position. We have to raise your cultivation swiftly so that we can save him. A determined light could be seen in the depths of their eyes. On the other side of the portal, Zhongxian looked at the destroyed altar before him with clenched fists. It wasn't that his reflexes weren't fast enough. Rather, the enemy had left a formation right beneath the altar to ensure that it would be destroyed as soon as he came over, thus severing all of his paths of escape. In other words, no matter what the enemy had prepared for him from here onward, he could only advance ahead and deal with whatever that came his way promptly. Retreating was no longer an option for him. I thought that you wanted my Library of Heaven's Path. How are you going to hold the ritual now that you have destroyed the altar? Zhongxian spoke with a deep voice as he examined his surroundings nonchalantly. The reason why Kongsha sent Fu Chunzi and the others to capture Du Qingyuan was so that he could acquire the altar required to hold the ritual. After all the planning he had done, he eventually chose to destroy it without any hesitation. Could it be that Kongsha's goal had changed? Was it that he no longer desired the library of Heaven's Path anymore? Zhongxian's voice echoed loudly across the path ahead. After waiting for some time, there was still no response. It was as if there was no other living being here other than him. I guess I can only advance forward. With completely no idea as to what the other party was up to, Zhongxian felt as if he was walking into a lion's den. With a frown on his forehead, he raised his foot and began making his way forward cautiously. His clone followed closely behind him. The passageway wasn't too long. It didn't take long before a massive palace appeared before his eyes. It was even more magnificent and grander than the Hall of Gods he had seen previously. It was erected above a massive cradle of air currents, sealing the cradle entirely such that not the slightest bit could leak out. Zhongxian was a little taken aback. The sight before him looked like a whirlpool being clogged up by a humongous behemoth. No matter how powerful the whirlpool was, it was unable to faze the behemoth at all. Such was the grandeur of the palace. Pitch-black air streams seemed to fly toward the unfathomable darkness, leaving one's heart trembling from the eeriness. Yet, none was able to taint the palace, reminiscent of a valve in a pipe. I should try entering the palace. No matter what Kongsha was up to, he could only dive right into it and try to make his way out alive. The problem wouldn't solve itself just by him waiting outside. He walked to the entrance of the palace together with his clone and saw two humongous pillars rising deep into the void. It looked as if the centerpiece that was pinning the palace in place, preventing it from flying away along with the air currents. Perplexed, Zhongxian activated the Eye of Insight to take a closer look. It's a semi-divinity artifact. Zhongxian remarked in surprise. He couldn't help but recall how the doors of the Hall of Gods had been a semi-divinity artifact too. He took out the Tongshang sword and brandished it lightly. A burst of sword chi slit through the air currents, heading right for the two pillars. Ding! A spark could be seen as it struck the pillar, but it didn't leave the slightest mark at all. Even the pillars of this palace are so formidable. Just where is this place? Zhongxian murmured in astonishment. The palace before him was distinctly different from the Hall of Gods, but the materials that were used to build it seemed to be of even higher quality than the latter. The gates of the palace weren't locked nor shut, so Zhongxian was able to walk in without any problems. A few steps later, Zhongxian realized that something was amiss. He turned around to look at his clone, who was still standing by the doorway, and asked, "Aren't you coming along?" "I can't step across the doorway." The clone demonstrated by taking a step forward, but in the next moment, a force assaulted him, causing him to retreat several steps consecutively. It was as if there was an invisible force field blocking his way, preventing him from advancing any further. "You can't step across the doorway?" Zhongxian walked back to the doorway and tried touching the area which his clone was unable to pass through. There was nothing at all. Yet, it was a fact that his clone was unable to advance a step at all. "Never mind. You should enter my storage ring for the time being then," Zhongxian said with a wave of his hand. After keeping his clone into his storage ring, he walked into the doorway again. However, just as he was going to pass through, his clone suddenly materialized out of the storage ring and stumbled backward. This time, Zhongxian was really stunned. His clone was driven out even when he was hiding in the storage ring? Wasn't this invisible barrier a little too domineering? They tried a few more methods, but his clone was simply unable to walk into the palace. "Since you aren't able to enter the area, you should wait here for the time being," Zhongxian sighed deeply. "It seems like Kongsha knows how troublesome it is to deal with my clone, so he did something to separate me from my clone." Zhongxian thought warily. As formidable Kongsha was, he was only able to fight his clone to a draw back then. This probably made Kongsha view his clone as a major threat, so he intentionally prepared this so that he could deal with him individually. In other words, it was likely that he would meet in danger within this palace. If so, should he continue advancing? Holding the Tongshang sword tightly, Zhongxian took in a deep breath. "If I dare not to face Kongsha even after my cultivation has reached semi-divinity realm, I'll never be able to break open the dimension barrier and ascend to the firmament." Zhongxian closed his eyes and thought. A cultivator's state of mind was extremely important. There was only a thin line between recklessness and cowardice. Once a cultivator caved into his fears, he would lose his courage to charge forward in times when it truly counted. Most likely, Kongsha had prepared this in order to put him in a dilemma. It wouldn't be wrong for him to back out right now. He only had one life, and there was no wrong in prioritizing his safety. However, the faces of Luo Ruoxin and his direct disciples flashed across his head at this moment. There was something that was more important to him at the moment that he couldn't give up on, even if he had to take this gamble. So, he cast aside his fears and walked right into the palace. The interiors of the hall were unlighted and nothing could be seen at all. There was something in the darkness that seemed to be wearing down his senses and mind. Even when he activated the Eye of Insight, he was still unable to peer through it. "I'm already in here. Make your move if you wish to kill me." Zhongxian slowly advanced forward with his sword in hand. Echoes of his voice sounded all over the palace, but there was no response at all. Perplexed, he backed away slightly, wanting to leave the darkness temporarily to reassess the situation. However, in the next moment, he felt his back pressing against a wall. He had barely taken a few steps away from the gates earlier, and before he knew it, the gates had already vanished. To put it in other words, he was already trapped in the formation of the enemy. Flaws. Zhongxian pressed his hand against the wall behind him and willed. If he could just use his Library of Heaven's path here, he would be able to peer through the formation right before him. Wang. The Library of Heaven's path jolted in his mind, but no book was compiled. Damn it! Zhongxian cursed beneath his breath. Just as he had thought, this palace was severed from the heavens too. Only Kongsha, who knew about the heavens' imperfections, would prepare such a hand to deal with him. Plunged in the midst of utter darkness, where his senses were confounded and his mind was befuddled, he was in a truly vulnerable position. It seemed like this was Kongsha's trump card against him. "I have no choice. Since I'm unable to use my eyes and my spiritual perception, I can only rely on my ears then." Zhongxian thought. He was nervous but he wasn't panicked yet. He closed his eyes and focused his attention on his ears. The silence in the air caused a ringing sensation in his ears that made it hard for him to hear, but through focusing his full attention, he was still able to pick up some of the minute noises carried along with the wind. Drip, drip. It was the sound of water droplets dripping, and it was coming from a distance away. Go. Zhongxian brandished his sword, and a surge of sword chi flew right in the direction where the water droplets were coming from. But astonishingly, there was no response at all. It was as if the darkness had swallowed his sword chi at some point in time, unraveling his attack. Just as Zhongxian was utterly perplexed as to what was happening, Kongsha's voice suddenly echoed in the air, "Walk out of this room before the water drips out. Otherwise, you'll be evicted from here." Evicted from here? Zhongxian's confusion only served to further deepen. Didn't Kongsha intentionally lure him here in order to deal with him? Why would he threaten to evict him out of this room then? The altar has been destroyed, so even if I am evicted from this palace, I won't be able to leave this area either. Instead, I might just be trapped till my death. So, I have no choice but to follow his rules for the time being. Once I find him and save Palace Master Du, I'll make sure to rip him apart. Zhongxian thought as he exhaled deeply. No matter what Kongsha was up to, he would just have to deal with everything the other party had prepared. Eventually, he should be able to find Kongsha at the end of the path. Having decided on his next course of action, he began examining his surroundings carefully. Even though I can't see anything at all, there's nothing attacking me either. Most likely, this is a confinement formation, Zhongxian thought. The fact that it could hinder his spiritual perception and Eye of Insight likely meant that it was a confinement formation far beyond his imagination. Nevertheless, as long as it's a formation, there is bound to be some anomaly in the flow of spiritual energy in the surroundings. As long as I can figure out the flow of spiritual energy, I should be able to deduce the locations of the formation core and formation flags. With that, it shouldn't be too difficult for me to overcome the formation, Zhongxian thought. So, he closed his eyes and began perceiving his surroundings carefully. The key purpose of formation flags and formation core was to redirect the flow of spiritual energy based on the needs of the formation. Given so, there was bound to be some anomalies in the flow of spiritual energy in the surroundings where a formation existed. As long as he could create a visual mapping of the flow of spiritual energy in his mind, he would be able to find a way to resolve this issue. This was also the most fundamental formation deciphering method on the master-teacher continent. As the most proficient formation master on the master-teacher continent, it went without saying that he was familiar with these basics. Something is wrong. It feels like the spiritual energy in here is homogeneous. To his surprise, the concentration of spiritual energy within the palace was equal. There was no concentration gradient at all. This threw Zhong Xian off a little. He took 2 steps forward and tried perceiving his surroundings once more. The concentration of spiritual energy was still the same. He tried taking a few steps left and a few steps right too, and it was still the same. This didn't make sense. Was his deduction wrong? Were there no formation flags and formation core here? Left with no choice, Zhong Xian finally took out a compass and placed it on his palm. He couldn't even see the needle on top due to the deep darkness, but as long as it moved, he would still be able to sense the direction it was pointing toward. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.